Thank you, Councillor Parrish, and good afternoon. I'm going to provide a very shortened review of the protocols for electronic participation in this committee meeting. The recommended view is to ensure a full view of the presentation slides is the stack or side-by-side view, which can be accessed through the layout button. This meeting is being live streamed. In order to ensure that this meeting remains accessible to the public, the meeting will be recessed for 10 minutes if the live stream is interrupted or fails. Staff will work to get the live stream up and running as soon as possible, and we will keep the committee advised. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon located to the right of your name in the participant list. Speakers list will be determined based on members who have raised their hand using the icon. Recorded votes are not allowed at committee meetings. The committee chair or I will call for any objections. If you have an objection, please indicate your name and objection. If no objections are stated, the motion will be deemed to be approved. If you are participating electronically and you are leaving the meeting, please send an email to council@pilregionca to indicate that you are leaving the meeting. If you leave the meeting for any votes thereafter, you will be marked as absent. We shall now commence the meeting with the roll call. Please indicate your presence by responding here when called upon. Councillor Carlson?
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Fortini?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, thank you. Chair Yanika?
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Innes?
Good afternoon, present.
Thank you. Councillor Kiernan? Councillor Kiernan? I don't see her. Councillor Medeiros?
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Parrish?
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Starr?
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Thompson?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Vicente?
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Sinclair is noted as present. Are there any other councillors who are present? Hearing none. Thank you. Councillor Parrish will now preside over the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none. Under approval of the agenda, we had another half dozen pieces of correspondence come to us. I think it's been sent to all of you. One is 106.105 Laj Kar. One is 6.106 Raghav Patel. One is 6.107 Masa Karim. One is 6.108 Yuda Maharaj. One is 6.010, it's 1.09, 6.109 Ayush Gar. 6.110 Bani Dillon. 6.111 Sabine Abbas. 6.112 Marina Summer. They're all very similar in nature. If you've read one of the correspondences, you've got the message from all of them. So can we add those to the agenda for receipt only? Someone move that? Councillor Innes, thank you very much. Any objections? Thank you. We'll go to...
Sorry, Chair, can I just interrupt for one quick second? Councillor Kiernan is having difficulties getting on, and she's having a difficult time getting a response back from any of clerks. Could they reach out to her, please?
We will send her the WebEx invite just now. Thank you. To Councillor Kiernan. Thank you.
Thank you. We are going to start, so can someone move approval of the agenda? Jennifer, you did. Delegations, we're going to start with 4.1, which is Jennifer Leforestier, resident town of Caledon, regarding municipal comprehensive review. And you have 10 minutes, Jennifer.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Councillor Parrish. I wish to delegate about an alternative to sprawl that has already been achieved in Waterloo Region by Waterloo City Council. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, you can.
I hope that this can be considered as part of the municipal comprehensive review. It's called the Countryside Line. Waterloo Region's Countryside Line is made up of 6 different growth boundaries, one for the urban area of Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, and one for each of the rural settlement areas. These lines protect farms and the natural environment from suburban sprawl. The countryside line protects wetlands, woodlands, groundwater recharge locations, and was developed as a way to emulate the Greenbelt in Waterloo. The region of Waterloo's official plan calls for developers to build in existing urban areas rather than sprawling out into agricultural areas and green spaces. The region of Waterloo's countryside line is a boundary that protects the cultural, economic, and environmental heritage of our rural lands from the pressures of urban sprawl. Key elements are a fixed border between rural and urban areas, directing growth to make better use of land and municipal services within the built-up areas of the region, increasing transportation choice, including the creation of a rapid transit system, protecting our drinking water and significant environmental areas, and increasing the quality of life of citizens in Waterloo region. There are 6 important reasons to hold the line and maintain hard urban boundaries. The first is local food and agriculture. Caledon has 13% of the farmland in the GTA and 85% of the region of Peel's total farmland. Brampton has 11% and Mississauga has 4%. The remaining amount of farmland in the Greater Golden Horseshoe is only 5%. If there's a global food shortage, the GTA would need to depend on locally grown food rather than food imported from other provinces or countries. That food should come from places like the Peel Plain and the Holland Marsh. Due to developer interest with ties to the Ford government, we're paving the last remaining prime farmland. Minister Steve Clark announced yesterday that 2 acres of land will be added to the Greenbelt for every acre of land affected by minister's zoning orders. That's 45 MZOs, just under 3,000 acres of land, which has them committing 6,000 acres of the Greenbelt. That sounds like good news when you say it fast. However, the lands in Georgina were untouchable anyway due to an LPAT proceeding. The province is not being genuine in preservation of sensitive lands like the Holland Marsh. In fact, Minister Clark is doing the very thing they said they would not do, which is develop the Greenbelt. Green buffers and fragmented pieces of green fields are not ecosystems. They're just sad, disconnected remnants that capture less carbon. The lands chosen by Minister Clark do nothing to preserve the Holland Marsh or the Cree burial grounds that exist there. They don't, for example, mitigate the loss of prime farmland at Humber Station Road for a GO train station that may not be built for a decade. Farmers contribute more than $47 billion to the provincial economy. Why is our farmland expendable? Safe drinking water. I live in the headwaters. If my well runs dry, the city isn't going to dig a new one. We can't call the city to fix it when our water turns brown. The homeowner is left to mitigate impacts when the well runs dry. If the water is contaminated, what happens next? If the excessive stormwater management ponds that are being imposed on environmentally protected lands impact local groundwater, that affects everyone, including residents downstream in Mississauga. The region of Peel needs to counterbalance this cronyism and represent the public interest. The mindset that would offset or attempt to move a wetland is planning storm management ponds on Greenbelt Oak Ridges marine lands that are not serviced in existing agricultural neighborhoods on protected countryside lands. If the groundwater becomes contaminated, what then? Compact, lively neighborhoods. We need a hard urban boundary to address the climate emergency that Peel declared. Development is being proposed by rezoning protected countryside to prestige industrial for mega warehousing, when the area already has Amazon and UPS close by. Some towns are using MZOs to bypass citizen engagement, unlock lands by expounding boundaries, rezoning prime farmland, and protected countryside for subdivisions with no transit. A GO train that may not be built for a decade should not be the excuse to sprawl over farmland. This kind of development creates more car-reliant growth and is the opposite of what is required to reach climate targets by 2030. Global CO2 levels have reached the highest level in 4 million years, but somehow meager green buffers will help the woodlots and meandering streams that will be surrounded by concrete and road salt. If the region of Peel believes there's a climate emergency, then the year to pay attention to is 2030, not 2051. Affordable housing for all. Taxpayers and voters throughout the Greater Golden Horseshoe will have to pay for this sprawl. Each new subdivision adds $1,000 in cost to the tax base. Road repair costs $900,000 per kilometer. One truck's journey equals 8,000 cars. These costs are unsustainable in a housing crisis that cannot be solved with 40,000 square foot McMansions. Instead, we need more social housing, infill, gentle density in existing urban areas, serviced by better transit for our aging population and our younger generations. All of the major NGOs have formally asked that the province require municipalities to accommodate the entire projected population growth in the Greater Golden Horseshoe within existing neighborhoods. And lastly, The reason for hard urban boundaries is sustainable transportation and financial responsibility. The region of Peel opposed the GTA West Highway, yet the proponents are still assuming its existence and forging ahead with massive projects. It's concerning that certain councillors are stating the GTA West is legislated. The GTA West is under a federal environmental impact assessment. It's not yet approved. Allowing sprawl at this time on the last remaining prime farmland serves developers. It does not serve the public who is opposed. If the Greenbelt plan is now compromised due to private interests, then it is time to look at other planning tools like the Countryside Line and Waterloo. Waterloo pivoted to the Countryside Line when they were left out of the Greenbelt plan. If protected countryside and environmentally protected lands have no currency in council chambers, then the public demands planning that does. The MCR needs to include the option to hold the line at Mayfield Road. There has already been work started on road widening and expropriation of lands without reasonable and appropriate public engagement. There are sensitive lands north of that boundary that are being degraded with truck depots and gravel sites and proposed gas stations, etc. This is illegal land use on prime farmland. The Auditor General is due to publish the Hempstead report in the fall, which will assess the accuracy of the growth plan projections. What if the report concludes the growth projections are largely inflated? The AG has already assessed that as of March 2020, environmental assessments are 81% non-compliant with the recommendations made in 2016. Meanwhile, development proposals are coming fast and furiously, like the massive 10,800,000 square foot warehouse that is being proposed between two Greenbelt fingerlings. In summary, local councils are responsible for addressing climate change as identified by the IACC. Please consider holding the line for Peel Region and implementing hard urban boundaries or the Countryside Line. Thank you.
Very good, Jennifer. You did it. Record time. Thank you. Jennifer, Councilor, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Laforte, for your presentation. I was going to say, take a breath in between each of your statements so that it's easier for us to actually follow along with what you're saying, but I know you're trying to cram it into the 10 minutes.
If you need more time, I would be happy to take a breath.
I just want to know, were you a Caledon resident in 2005 when the province approved the Greenbelt plan?
Was I a Caledon resident? No, I was a resident of Ontario, though.
Okay. And did you participate in that process?
I participated in the land review with David Crombie.
Okay, so that was the four plans review about 5 years ago.
About 10 years ago, yes.
10 years ago, not the original Greenbelt plan. Okay, thank you very much.
I don't see any other questions, Jennifer. Last call. Thank you very much for your presentation. Good as always. And you actually had 3 minutes left, so could have taken a breath, but thank you very much.
You're
always interesting and you're always well informed.
Thank you very much.
For your delegation today.
Thank you.
Next, we have Michael Gagnon, Managing Principal Planner, and Andrew Walker, Principal Planner, Gagnon Walker Domes, on behalf of Mansrin Limited, CO 722147 Ontario Limited.
Councillor Parrish, is Stephanie. Just before we proceed to 4.2, if we can just move mover.
I'm Rusty.
Receipt.
Okay, Councillor Carlson will move receipt. Anybody object? Okay, thank you. Michael Gagnon and Andrew Walker.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and members of committee and staff. It's Michael Gagnon speaking. I'm joined this afternoon with Andrew Walker. He's just off screen, but he will be doing the second half of our presentation. Thank you for this opportunity to present to you this afternoon. I'm seeing an image of the presentation just before I start, but it seems to be out of focus. I'm wondering if the staff are able to adjust that, or perhaps I'm the only one seeing it out of focus.
If you can change your view, Michael, to stack or side-by-side view.
We can see it now very clearly.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So yes, this afternoon we're here speaking on behalf of Mansrin Limited. The photograph that you see on the screen right now is the cover of our presentation. Our clients' lands are those outlined in red, and we are in just north of the existing Caledon East Village. If we could please go through the next two pages to formal page 1. The next page, please. Next page. There you go. Thank you very much. So our purpose in delegating this afternoon, Madam Chair and Committee, is to request support from the Region of Peel and the town of Caledon to the official plan review and the comprehensive review. And what we're seeking is inclusion of our client's property within what I think is fairly described as a modest expansion to the Caledon East Rural Service Center boundary. Our client's property measures approximately 38 hectares, pardon me, in size. And we are, as I mentioned, just north of the existing settlement boundary of Caledon East. Clients have been actively involved in the official plan review and the MCR. And an interesting aspect of the request this afternoon and through our previous submissions is that there's a parcel of land that we refer to as the George Crescent Estate Residential Subdivision. It abuts our client's property on the south, and south of the George Crescent subdivision is the existing boundary of Caledon East. That subdivision is fully developed, and at the time of its development, there were a couple of road stubs that had been set aside that were deeded to the municipality for potential road extensions into our client's property. And we're also seeking a technical amendment to bring those lands in. And in that respect, our request this afternoon is a little bit unique compared to some of the other ones that you might be receiving, because we're also speaking to the technical amendment to bring in someone else's lands. And when I say someone else's, there's not a single owner. There's a number of individuals who own the estate lots on George Crescent. The size of that acreage is about 61 hectares. We can go to the next slide, please. So on this slide, just to help everyone orient themselves, we've got the Caledon Town Hall identified with the text box at the bottom of the plan with the red arrow. That's Town Hall. And then the Mansron property is in red, and the George Crescent subdivision has the dashed blue lines surrounding it. And as you can see, that's an existing subdivision, fully built out. And for all intents and purpose, that would be a technical amendment to bring that into the plan. And then the Mansron property would be brought in through this exercise as part of the amended boundary. And at this time, I want to thank Councillor Innes, because we did have an opportunity to speak with her, and she had raised a very good point in that regard in terms of the residential development that's being proposed and the relationship to the Greenbelt. So we've done some further investigation. So if the boundary of the village is adjusted, the planned development for residential purposes then would not offend the policy framework. So thanks to the councillor for sort of putting a very good question out to us as we spoke to her leading up to today's presentation. I just want to go to the next slide, and then I'll pass it on to Andrew to go over the provincial policy. We've summarized some of the merits of the proposal here, and our hope is that in working with the council and the committee and the staff, we'll be able to further explore these. First of all, we see the Mansron proposal and also the inclusion of the George Crescent existing development as a logical expansion to the existing community. Secondly, as I've mentioned, there is this proximity to the existing residential community of Caledon East, as well as the estate subdivision. There's an opportunity to accommodate the planned progression of residential development in a form that would contribute to providing a range of housing options in Caledon East. So Caledon East, we've seen recently some townhouse development, which is a welcome addition to the sort of type and range of housing that's provided. We see this as an opportunity to perhaps build upon what we see on George Crescent and also complete that exercise that had been started many years ago. There's also the benefit from existing and planned infrastructure. Innes Lake Road is already existing, so no additions to the arterial road network. We've got municipal water that would be available to the site. We've also sort of started exploring with our client the idea of perhaps working with the municipality to see if there would be a need for some additional parkland to contribute to what the town already has in this community. And of course, ultimately, this would contribute to provision of a complete community. So I'm going to just turn it over to Andrew to go over some of the key policy points that were raised in our discussion with the councillor and with staff in one of their more recent reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. And if I could get the next slide, please. Great, thank you. So we, as Michael had mentioned, we have had a look at the provincial policy framework, including the Greenbelt Plan, Growth Plan, and ORMCP. And the Caledon East Rural Service Centre is permitted and recognized settlement area within the limits of the Greenbelt Plan. And the expansion of the Caledon East Rural Service Centre to include both the Manzarin site and the, as we refer to, technical inclusion of the George Crescent real estate residential subdivision would be something that would be permitted by the Greenbelt Plan through an MCR, which is currently underway. In this respect, once expanded, the designation would switch from the current protected countryside designation to towns and village. And for lands that are within that countryside area, as part of an MCR under the growth plan, there are criteria that's set out, and it's specifically section 2283 of the growth plan that set out expansion criteria, and more specifically, it says subsection K and subsection II, which Hemson had noted in their technical memorandum in a Peel staff report that was tabled back in December. And those include that expansions should be modest, represent no more than a 5% increase in the size of the existing settlement area, up to a maximum of 10 hectares, and that residential development should not be permitted on more than 50% of the lands that are added to the settlement area. And if I could get the next slide, please. Great. So as I mentioned, there was the December 2020 staff report that included the technical memorandum. And with respect to that technical memorandum that Hemson prepared, our client's property and request was identified as SABE request number 4, and that can be seen in the image that's on the right-hand side of the slide. And in so doing, when we reviewed the policies for conformity with the specific policy that Hemson identified, as we mentioned, the Manzarin property does measure 39 hectares, which represents approximately 8% of Caledon East's existing settlement area. This compares to the 5% increase, which is permitted, so that's a slight exceedance. But what we're looking to do is, of the 39 hectares, though, is to continue to work with staff at both the Region of Peel and the town of Caledon on determining the appropriate location for the 10 hectares that's noted in the growth plan policies, thereby conforming with that particular policy on the expansions. Next slide, please. The Manzarin property does have an interesting history to it, and through part of the expansion, there's an opportunity to resolve some historic OPA application and OMB LPAT appeals that currently exist. The Manzarin lands have been subject to an official plan amendment application and an associated LPAT appeal dating back to March 29, 1989, when an application was filed. This appeal was consolidated with an appeal of Caledon OPA 114 in 1997, and to date, those appeals still remain unresolved, but we're hoping to work with the town and region staff. Next slide, please. And just in conclusion, what we're looking to do is work with staff at both the region and the town, as I said. The Manzarin proposal represents an opportunity to expand the limits of the Caledon East Rural Service Centre. It is a modest proposal, also includes a technical adjustment to include the existing George Crescent Estate subdivision. It is representative of a logical extension to the existing settlement area and provides opportunity to accommodate residential development in a form that will contribute to providing a range of housing options throughout Caledon East. The proposal would benefit from existing and planned transportation infrastructure and municipal water service. And lastly, the opportunity exists to resolve a longstanding OMB LPAT appeal. And that concludes our presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions that committee may have.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sinclair?
Hey, sorry. Yeah,
I think
did not.
give it a try again.
A lot of background noise. How am I now?
Good.
Okay, we did a 5-year Caledon East secondary plan some years ago and did not include these lands in the new boundaries at that time. And Caledon East is surrounded now by the Greenbelt Plan and Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan areas. And I thought the Greenbelt Plan essentially froze settlement boundaries inside the Greenbelt Plan. It certainly froze Orangeville. So my question is, if Mansorin is included, why not all around Caledon East? What's the rationale? I don't get it. Thank you.
Would you like to answer, Michael?
Madam Chair, it's Andrew Walker. I'll take that. Councillor Sinclair is correct that there was a 5-year Caledon East secondary plan study that was undertaken a number of years ago. It is my understanding that our client at the time was participating in that, as well as other studies and other processes that took place both before and after that. With regard to the Greenbelt Plan, as noted earlier in the presentation and as noted by Hemson in their staff report, or in their amendment appendix, to the staff report in December 2020, the growth plan does include criteria for expansions into the protected countryside area. There are strict criteria that need to be met and conform to. They include things that it has to be with a current boundary, not from an area that's outside of that and then into that. Caledon East is partially within that area, so we're in that respect. And then there are certain size restrictions as well, and that's what we're working towards. Want to work with staff at both levels of government to deal with the appropriate size of the Mansorin lands.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
You're muted.
Chair, we can't hear you.
Carolyn, you're on mute.
Oh, God. Okay, Mayor Thompson, can you move receipt of the delegation, please? Thank you. Any objections? Seeing none. And we have the same pair of stars about to present on a Caledon Village Properties. Michael, are you ready?
And it's just a little bit out of focus again. I'm not sure whatever was done last time. Is there anything you did, Andrew?
Just please proceed. It looks fine at our end, Michael.
Oh, okay, wonderful, great. So, Madam Chair and members of committee, we're here this afternoon also speaking on behalf of Caledon Village Properties GP Inc., or otherwise referenced as Kilmer. The Tannenbaum family is also affiliated with Caledon Village Properties. The property that you're looking at this afternoon is located on Charleston Side Road, west of Hurontario Street, and in the Caledon Village. And it's locally known as the Dodds Pit. If we could go 2 slides in, please. And the next one. So thank you. Similar to the previous presentation, through the MCR process and the official plan review, what we're hoping to accomplish working with region and town staff is a modest adjustment to the boundary of Caledon Village to accommodate the whole of the Dodds Pit. This particular property is approximately 47.75 hectares. And as mentioned, it has locally been referred to as the Dodds Pit. And historically, there was a gravel operation that functioned out of this parcel. Of the 43 hectares, approximately 23 hectares of the property is located within the current Caledon Village rural settlement area boundary. And that leaves 19 just shy of 20 hectares located outside of the village proper. If we go to the next slide, that we've got a little bit of a blow up of the village. So most of the village within the yellow boundary is fully built out. And this part of Caledon is really interesting because you've got small settlement areas and then you have a collection of sort of scattered villages and hamlets. And as you can see, this particular property is half in and half outside of the village. And you can see the remnants of the gravel operation straddling the village boundary. And that pit is basically exhausted of all sort of commercially viable material. The only material left in there would be sufficient to be used as part of the infrastructure building program for a future residential development. And in fact, that's what is being proposed. If we can go to the next slide, please. So that is we've got a conceptual draft plan of subdivision on the right-hand side of the screen. The blue line that cuts the property in half identifies the existing village boundaries. So the lands on the right-hand side are in the village, and the lands on the right side are in the village, the left side is outside of the village. And an interesting aspect of this property is along the southern edge of it, there is a existing creek and valley feature. The proposal that we are hoping to advance in cooperation with the municipalities is to have those lands set aside for natural heritage system. And the residential plan would be supplemented then by a storm detention pond, as you can see shown diagrammatically with 2 pond areas. And then also up at Charleston Side Road, there would be a dedication of a public park. And the size of the lots here, because we've taken a good look at this village in terms of the lot characteristics, the idea here would be to have 1 acre lots, similar in size and matching the provisions in the zoning bylaw that prevails throughout most of the village, and most certainly on the lands immediately to the north and the east. So there's about 100 units here. The exact number of units at the end of the process would be subject to, number 1, getting in the boundary, and then number 2, going through a detailed planning process. In consultation with Councillor Kiernan, before this meeting, we were trying to get a sense of what sort of things are challenges in this village right now. And it was very helpful for us to find out that there is an existing problem with stormwater management in the village. And there's also a deficit of community facilities, so we understand. And in this respect, our clients would certainly welcome an opportunity through the development approvals process to see if these lands couldn't be used in part to assist with the stormwater management problem that is plaguing some of the existing community, and then also with the lands dedicated for public park use, see if there isn't an opportunity for some community facilities to be provided there. We've summarized the merits, the general merits of the proposal on the left-hand side of this slide. in addition to a logical expansion of the community, it would be a shame to not be able to redevelop and rehab the entire property to a plan that you see here that would have residential as well as the stormwater management pond, the valley lands, and the parklands. We are obviously in proximity to existing residential lands in the community. We also see that there is benefit, again, similar to the other proposal, to access existing road infrastructure. We also have municipal water here. We would be on private service, which much of the town is, well, all the town is really. Point number 7 reinforces the idea of assisting and hopefully working with the town to see if we can't be part of the solution to the stormwater management problem that is plaguing parts of the village. We see an opportunity to do a level of enhanced preservation and enhancement of the valley feature. And really important coming out of our recent discussions would be the opportunity for community facilities located on the parkland. And of course, there's a chance to create a complete community. One of the things as well, we have approached this exercise here a little bit differently. You'll see that there's a dashed red line. We're suggesting through this process, the valley lands, both inside and outside of the village, would not be included as part of the future expanded village boundary. They would be left outside, thereby reducing the amount of lands that would be coming into the adjusted municipal boundary. Andrew's going to go through some of the policy framework and also some of the aggregate issues that were raised by Councillor Innes also, who was helpful in being, I guess, the devil's advocate and putting questions to us. So we were able to chase down a few answers for the councillor on that as well. Andrew?
Great, thank you. Next slide, please. And thank you again, Madam Chair and members of the committee. On the screen is a copy of the rehabilitation plan that's currently in place for the Dodds Pit. And as can be seen, the current rehabilitation plan would be for basically a lake that covers the majority of the property, and it would consume the Caledon Creek that currently traverses the property on a slight diagonal from west to east in a north-south direction. As mentioned before, the Dodds Pit has been a gravel pit that's operated for over 50 years and is to be rehabilitated in satisfaction of the Aggregate Resources Act. And we did some looking into that, and rehabilitate is a defined term in the ARA, and specifically in section 1, and it's subsection B in that definition. It notes that rehabilitate is to treat land from which aggregate has been excavated so that the use or condition of the land, and this is the important one, is changed to another use or condition that is or will be compatible with the use of the adjacent land. And in this regard, the MNR has established precedents in the past to accept a municipally approved plan of subdivision as a satisfactory substitution for the rehabilitation plan. And if I could get the next slide, please. And as an example of that particular process, on the screen is a view of the Lakelands Village subdivision. It's located, as you see in the key plan, around Beauvair Drive East and Highway 410 in the city of Brampton. Lakelands Village subdivision was a former gravel pit. In fact, the owners of the subject site that we're talking about today were also involved in this particular property as well. Its original rehabilitation plan was substituted by a plan of subdivision, resulting in the current community shown on the screen. And it's this same process that we are proposing to be applied to the current property. Obviously not necessarily as dense, but it would be in keeping with the character of the existing community that it's within. And if I could get the slide, please. Yes.
Up, please.
Pardon me, it cut in?
Are you preparing to wind up? You're at 10 minutes.
Yes, yeah, we'll be, well, I'll be quick.
Okay.
Thank you. So on this page here, what we're identifying is the Town of Caledon's Aggregate Rehabilitation Master Plan. This is the ultimate vision plan. The report is still to be completed and tabled at Caledon Council, but this is what is the vision as part of that. And of note, you'll see the subject site is identified with the text box and the arrow. And the vision for the development of the entire Dodds Pit is for development, and you see the open space area is also identified in the corner of the site. And if I can get the next slide. Actually, move to the next slide.
So is this your last slide?
Yes. Yeah. So similar to the previous one, we had looked at the growth plan policies. The same policies apply. And of note, the adjustment to the boundaries at the area of land that would be added would be 11.75 hectares, which is 4.57% of the existing Caledon Village. So this compares to the 5%, which we're under. And with the adjustment that we're looking at for the existing lands, that would reduce that number even further. And the residential lands, when that's taken into account, is 47.49%, which is under the 50% as well. And so in conclusion, similar to our previous presentation, we are seeking to work with both the staff at the region and the town of Caledon in moving this proposal forward. Thank you.
Sinclair, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Had a question. Has the Aggregate Resources Act extraction license been closed on this property?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, it has not been closed, but the pit has reached its useful extraction life, and the applicant is looking to now move forward with the rehabilitation and the update of the site.
Okay. A lot of the site is very steep slopes. It was a mine. And there's boulder pavement in extensive areas. Are you proposing to bring in imported fill to build the land up for a subdivision?
Through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor. So there would be a cut and fill exercise. The details about how much material might need to be brought in are still being worked on, but the objective would be to limit the amount of imported fill as much as possible. And as I mentioned, there is, and you talked about boulders, there is a boulder field there, and the materials in the boulder field would be used in part to help adjust the grades in the site, and also be used for base material for the construction of roads.
Okay. The next question is regards to provincial policy statements, mineral aggregate policies. And there's a policy in there prohibiting new land uses in former strip mines adjacent to identified aggregate resources. Are you aware of that policy?
The specific details, Madam Chair, through you to the councillor, of the policy, I, being perfectly honest, not intimately familiar with it, but the process that we've outlined is similar to the one that we adhered to and followed on the City of Brampton example when we approached the redevelopment and the rehabilitation of that facility. Our understanding and discussions with Kilmer, who are, one of their principal businesses is mining, is that the proposal that's before the region and the town certainly would not offend any of the aggregate policies. They're quite comfortable in advancing this, and also take some comfort from the slide that Andrew did reference with the aggregate rehabilitation study that the town is doing. So I think that it's safe to say that they are comfortable that they can comply with all provincial regulations.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kieran, would you move please. Seeing no objections, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentations. I'm going to stick my neck out on a limb here and ask staff, maybe Commissioner Dedman. My understanding of the purpose of this committee is to actually look at broad issues. We're looking at the MCR, we're looking at front-end funding, we're looking at policy. We're not really here to take planning applications for Caledon. That's Caledon's business. Am I correct in my interpretation of the purpose of the committee?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. You are correct. At the same time, staff are closely listening to the delegations, and we're taking the information, and we'll be happy to take it under consideration as we bring back policy in the future, especially as related to the municipal comprehensive review work that we're doing, as well as the OP update work.
Thank you. Would you also suspect, if we continue listening to these, that we're going to get every applicant that wants to apply in Caledon and Greenfields coming here? Would it not be okay? They've obviously talked to the two local councillors. They're well versed in what's going on. Councillor Sinclair seems to know more than anybody, and they have dealt with staff people. So their presentations to you probably would do the trick, would they not?
Absolutely. Staff are always available to meet with applicants, and we're open to listening and providing any type of guidance that we can as well. Sometimes those conversations can be more productive when they are held one-on-one.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to have to, at the end of the meeting, make a decision on whether we're going to accept any more of these very specific delegations. I'm finding it mildly uncomfortable because I'm not as familiar with the area. And I think the local councillors have a far better grasp on what these gentlemen want. And as we sit here and nod sagely, I hope they don't get any encouragement other than what Caledon wants. But thank you very much, Commissioner. We're going to go next to 4.4, Kathleen Wilson, regarding the hard urban boundary. Kathleen, are you here?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. And you've got 10 minutes.
Yep, I won't take 10 minutes. I had a small presentation as well.
Okay.
Yeah, you can switch to the next slide. Not hearing these other two applications, but I'm really delegating today to have the Region Appeal really look at with the MCR as a hard urban boundary. As you can see here, recently I added up all the development applications in Caledon, which I had access to. And right now, there are 2,635 acres of prime farmland or environmentally protected land, which will be up for development, whether for commercial, industrial use, or residential. And that's not including the Ward 3. I would add another 66 hectares for there for the Mansour one. And then the one we just saw for Ward 1, there was an additional 19 hectares in there. So we're really in a dire needs of losing prime agricultural land, which bring a lot to the Ontario economy. They generate about $47.3 billion of gross domestic product in Ontario and provide 860,000 jobs. The other thing was noticing is that feed costs are increasing as well. So animal feed is up 20% this year, and hay is now running $7 to $9 a bale. And that's up significantly from 3-4 years ago, where it was running $4 to $5 a bale. So as we cut away farmland to grow these cash crops such as corn, soy, and hay, we're also impacting feed for the animals that are consumed in part of our food supply. The other thing that I wanted to do, if you want to move to the next slide, please. I'm very concerned about once we develop EPA lands or agricultural lands, there's no way to get them back. We're paving over environmentally protected land, prime agricultural, and we're not going to meet our 2030 climate change targets, right? We're just inducing sprawl. We are eliminating, well, we're supposed to reduce what? In Caledon, 30% of the carbon output in 9 years. It's only 9 years away. And I actually looked up some things that corn crops actually absorb 36,000 pounds of carbon dioxide per year per acre. Grass or fields will absorb 3,400 pounds of carbon dioxide per acre per year. And then wetlands are very essential for maintaining carbon a balance, and they absorb a lot and they actually hold a lot of carbon. So if we're removing these from our environment, and then adding in housing and warehousing and more trucks and cars on the road, we're not going to meet that 36% reduction in 9 years. The Caledon also did the planning policy for the road for 2051 for agricultural trends with 2,300 plus acres up now for development in 1 year. That's just currently what's posted on the website that I know about. But we're not going to be able to preserve our lands. Next slide, please. So some of the recommendations of family, we can't stop farmers for selling their land, but as municipalities in the region, we can stop rezoning farms for developer gain. That's something we can do. Another thing is with, housing now, I think we deserve better. We should force developers to only develop and build to green standard. We need to invest in public transit, stop car dependent sprawl. For every house that's going to be built in Caledon, I know for at least it'd be a minimum of 2 cars. And they're not electric or whatever, it's just they're on the roads. We have to stop converting environmentally protected lands for housing, whether or not it's estate housing or anything. We have a limited supply of environmentally protected lands. Why are we building on them? And I would ask for us to, in the planning, to force a hard urban boundary, protecting the green belt, protecting our prime agricultural, and protecting our future and our children's and their children's future. Thank you.
Councillor Parrish, you're muted, and currently there are no speakers on the list.
Yes, I don't see any speakers. Councillor Vincente, could you move receipt, please? Councillor Fortini?
Councillor
Councillor
Fortini
Innes.
might have left already. He has
Okay,
an
Councillor
appointment.
Innes, can you move receipt? Thank you. Seeing no objections, we will go to 4.5. Thank you again, Kathleen. Sylvia Roberts?
Hello, my name is Sylvia. I have actually 2 separate delegations, which the clerk's office has decided to merge into one. One's on transit/transportation, one is on housing. Can I get an extension to get the time back?
I'll move for extra time, Chair.
Okay, I will give you 15 minutes.
Okay, I'll try to make it work. So one of the issues the region has is missing middle housing. We have a major housing shortage. We are physically not building enough. There's not enough high-rise capacity to do it. Next slide. One of the things we've been talking about at the meeting today is land, about it plowing some more fields under for it. And there is actually plenty of land in the region that is developable. I live in Peel Village in Brampton, for example. The neighborhood is below 50% of its population capacity. Its hard services are dramatically underused. Its land is one of the major costs of development. It can add more than $100 per buildable square foot. On the live stream, it is just showing Councillor Parrish. So when you're looking at larger units, because the region says it wants family-sized units, when you want a 1,000 square foot unit, $100 a square foot actually really starts to add up. And part of that is because despite there being plenty of land, we have a shortage because we have lots that the zoning will permit a 3,500 square foot McMansion on it, but you can't build a 3,000 square foot fourplex because tearing down a bungalow for a 3,500 square foot McMansion is fine and will preserve neighborhood character, but a 3,000 square foot fourplex will not. Next slide. Some of the other issues we have are soft costs. So when you have it as it's all extremely specifically zoned to single family homes of very specific type characteristics, I believe Brampton has over 40 different residential zoning, of which 10 are just for townhouses. It's kind of wild. Everything needs a rezoning application. And in some cases, even for low-rise residential, you'd still need an official plan amendment. It's all of these things start to add costs. The costs don't scale linearly. The more units you do, the cheaper it gets per unit. So I know Mississauga has looked at missing middle, and the problem you run into is the upfront costs of things like rezoning and official plan amendments for smaller projects where you're only splitting the cost over 10 to 15, less than 20 units. It really starts to bite into it. It's fairly time consuming. And if you're dealing with a subdivision of 500 houses, it's not a big deal because you're going to make plenty of money. But when it's like a couple houses that you're redeveloping, maybe just one, it gets quite expensive. There's also the cost for architects and building plans, which have their own issues. One of the ways the region some of the ways the regions and the municipalities could look at fixing this is by properly pre-zoning stuff. So not everything has to go through a rezoning application. And then also potentially in the US, what they're looking at, especially for like ADUs, is pre-approved building plans where the city approves it and then a developer can go and use that plan. We actually do that in Brampton, but we only do it for we only use it for single family homes where a developer will do 1,000 houses. Here's 6 plans, approve the 6 plans, and then they can knock it out. If you simply had it so there were pre-approved plans a developer could use, that saves time and money and a whole lot of staff time. Next slide. Another big issue are hard costs, such as subsurface and prep. If you look at the bottom left photo, it's a case of on many of these buildings, because of the parking, you need to build a 3-story or more pit, which takes a lot of time and money. Underground parking starts at like $50,000 a spot. And in Toronto, I've seen stuff go up to $100,000 per underground parking spot. Plus, these aren't leak-proof. Their water gets into them. Where do you think it goes? It goes into the region's water system, stormwater system, either stormwater or sewer systems. Why are we making parking required if we have a climate emergency? We also have actual like labor shortages when it comes to high-rise development. So in neighborhoods like Peel Village, there's actually significant excess capacity because the houses were designed for 5 or more people before low flow anything existed. So when you're building to modern standards with water efficient stuff, you can have 10 or 20 people living in a space that was originally designed for 5, and you're actually using less water than you were before. Next slide. So the economies of scale, as I've touched on, for sprawl, you get the economies of scale because you're only building like 6 houses and you're copying and pasting them over and over again. The crews get really good at building the same house, just mirrored. But when you're doing high rises like in Toronto, one of the things they do is duplicating floor plates, but missing middle doesn't really have those advantages unless you do something like pre-approved plans. It's on the soft cost thing slide, there was an image of a catalog back in the day. Sears literally used to sell mail order houses. You picked up the Sears Robux Honor Built Modern Home Guide, pick the house, place the order, and they would ship you a house in a boxcar. Some assembly required. Next slide. So, to go to the recap slide. So if this region wants to build pre-approved plans or wants to build missing middle, it needs to look at pre-approved plans, removing the parking minimums, because when dealing with missing middle, it'll just take up too much lot area and it's not viable. So you can say you want it, but if you have parking requirements, it's not feasible. Proactive rezoning. Modular housing in some cases. In Toronto, they have 6-story buildings that are able to be assembled very quickly because they're modular ones. And then also smaller units. So then it's to the next presentation. So the regional transit and transportation planning. Okay, next slide. So the region has a number of issues. It's growing quite quickly. The roads are going to cap out when they're looking at the Queen Street BRT. The cost to actually do it for 24 kilometers was $100 million. But if they wanted to actually widen where they could widen it, it would cost $500 million. So it's $100 million for a BRT, which can move the capacity. So it's taking 2 lanes, but it'll move the capacity of like 6 lanes of cars. Or you can widen the road, or you can also widen the road to add some of those lanes back, and it will cost you 4 times as much just for the road widening. The roads aren't going to work. The only way to make it work is cheating space, and the region really has to do the planning. Next slide. So the Hempson report has issues. So one of the things that it doesn't really, well, actually it does consider it. It's assuming that there's going to be mass migration out of Toronto and to the 905. The region of Peel is currently experiencing over 20,000 people per year leaving the region of Peel. And for Toronto, it's over 30,000. I know people don't want to expand the designated greenfield area, but here's the reality. If you don't do it, it's actually just going to get built in Shelburne. Actually, the housing is already being built in Shelburne. I've seen ads for townhouses in Dundalk. I'm sure the people in Caledon Village will be thrilled to find out that 20,000 people have been added up Highway 10 from them. They're going to drive through Caledon Village to go to work in Brampton. Or you can add the people in Brampton and Mississauga and do it more intensely. And to make that work without having cars destroy everything, because last meeting, I know some of the Caledon councillors noted there are an absurd numbers of cars for these houses going on. The roads aren't going to take it. So if you're going to do the designated greenfield, it needs to be a lot more intense, and you need to have transit going through fairly quickly. Next slide. So a Zoom line in Brampton, currently the Queen Street line is moving the equivalent of more than 2 arterial lanes, despite the fact it doesn't even get a dedicated lane. When it's upgraded to a full BRT, it will be able to move the equivalent of 4 or more lanes. It effectively allows you to cheat on the amount of space you have available. So the region really does need to look at transit. And so next slide. I know that the lower tiers, I know Mississauga, the reaction at Caledon suggesting maybe we should amalgamate transit. The Mississauga councillor, it seemed to be pried out of my cold dead hands. We don't actually have to amalgamate it to do more transportation planning. To do regional transportation planning, part of the issue is our roads are regional, but the transit planning is not necessarily, even though in Brampton, the median commute is 10 kilometers. It's a lot of distance, a bunch of which is going to be on regional roads. And when Caledon gets built out, there's going to be a lot of use of regional roads. So how could this work? It's when the region of Peel would normally flag a road as needing widening based on its current metrics. What it would do instead is talk with the local municipality about improving transit service on those areas. And for example, as Steeles is starting to run out of space, we need a Steeles BRT, which is a regional road. And that will help keep goods moving in the region of Peel. If you don't, the cars are going to congest it. Brampton is looking at it, was it 80,000 more people around Steeles in here, Ontario? good luck trying to move any trucks anywhere near that. One of the things the region should be looking at is a regional transit pass. In most major municipalities like Toronto or Chicago, you can, when you're doing transportation demand management, you can just give out either the local transit system or a commuter rail pass. Mississauga is in the situation of it doesn't have a commuter rail system, but it is a net importer of people for jobs. However, a Mississauga transit pass doesn't work on Brampton Transit, and a Brampton transit pass doesn't work on Mississauga Transit. So Electra is going to consolidate its Sandalwood and I think it's Meadowvale facilities near Steeles and Kennedy in Brampton. And they're planning for every single person there to drive. Why? There's no way they can feasibly do transportation demand management. Because for the people who live in Mississauga, a Mississauga Transit Pass won't get them there. And if they live in Mississauga, Brampton Transit Pass probably won't get it there. And they're not really looking at spending $260 a month on transit passes when for Brampton and Mississauga. So people will just drive instead. And both Steeles and Kennedy are regional roads. That is capacity that could be used up for things like moving freight. If we had regional transit passes that worked for both my way and Brampton, then employers like that could actually do transportation demand management. If you're the region of Peel and you're saying, hey, you should all implement transportation demand management, how is an employee who lives in Mississauga supposed to get to the regional offices in Brampton? So you're preaching something and you don't even have the ability to practice it. There's other ways it makes sense for TransHelp. The cost to transport people on TransHelp is over $30 from property tax per ride. If you save a total of 4 rides on TransHelp per month, then it's more than a Brampton Transit Pass. This would literally save money because if they're taking Brampton Transit, the subsidies from property tax. If they're taking TransHelp, the subsidy is also from property tax. It's 2 separate budgets, but it's still the homeowner who's paying for it. And I've talked to Peel District School Board. They have issues with regional learning choice programs because if you want your kid to go to them, either you have to have the time and the money to drive your kid there, or you can shell out $3,000 a year for private busing. And
Sylvia,
yeah.
You're wandering off into an area that really isn't relevant to this committee right now. Could you wrap up, please? We're not here really to talk about transit costs or any of these things. We're here to try to plan the distribution of people over the next 20 years. So could you just wrap this up?
Sure. So the planning of where people and goods are going to be in the long term in the region is going to rely on transit. And the way the transit systems in the region of Peel are currently set up is 2 completely separate systems with separate monthly passes that are incompatible is being a major obstruction to actually planning the movement of people and goods. By having a regional transit pass that worked on both of the systems without needing to consolidate the systems, it would allow the region to properly plan for regional movement of people and goods in a way that is compatible with the growth plan. Thank you. That's my delegation.
Thank you, Sylvia. Always very detailed. You've always done your research. I thank you very much. Mayor Thompson, will you move receipt? Thank you. Seeing no objections, we will go to Phil Poffin, Ontario Environmental Program Manager, Environmental Defense, regarding Region of Peel Municipal Comprehensive Review and land needs and problems with timeline and structure of Peel's MCR decision-making process. Phil, 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. My name, as the chair mentioned, is Phil Poffin. I'm Ontario Environment Program Manager with Environmental Defense, and I'm also a land use planning lawyer. I'm here to depute regarding the structure and timeline of Peel Region's MCR decision-making process. As you will see at item 6.102, there is a letter regarding interpretation and application of the land needs assessment methodology, but that letter was provided in response to the request of the chair at a previous meeting, and it's not related to this deputation directly in any case. So my deputation today pertains to a distinct issue. Environmental Defense is asking that Peel Region do what I think more than 100 Peel residents have now demanded in writing, and that is pause all its work premised on the current draft housing mix, employment mix, community area land need, employment area land need, and municipal allocations set out in the Land Needs Assessment and Intensification Analysis 2021, and then provide Planning and Growth Management Committee, direct staff to provide Planning and Growth Management Committee with an alternative, equally detailed and fleshed out plan, which includes recommended bylaw and official plan amendments, and with incentives that would ensure that all of Peel Region's projected housing and workplace demand, including demand for single-family and semi-detached homes, are accommodated within its existing settlement area boundary, and then give existing neighborhoods the density and mix of uses that they need to support active transportation and mass transit. And then after that point, conduct all subsequent planning on 2 parallel alternative tracks so that you're ready to pursue either of those approaches, and consult Peel residents extensively on both of those alternatives, those 2 fleshed out alternatives rather than one sort of predetermined alternative, until at least January 22. You want to present people with a real choice on whether to sprawl outwards or grow within existing neighborhoods. And then you want to extend this until after this horrible pandemic is over, so that they have the chance to meet in person, to really discuss the alternatives, and to organize and come to a consensus after all the constraints and distractions of the pandemic have been lifted. And finally, but very significantly, Peel should adjust the planning timelines so that no firm decision on settlement area boundary expansion, on which of these 2 alternative planning tracks it will pursue, is taken until after the next provincial election. Because it's only then that you'll know whether Peel Region is ever going to be required to conform with the current growth plan. And there's no indication that certainly the opposition parties would be requiring conformity with that growth plan. And it's worth finding out, especially given the Auditor General's investigation into this whole growth planning and land needs assessment process at the provincial level. It is essential that the Peel Region hit the brakes on land needs assessment and consult Peel residents. That is firstly because despite the province's best efforts, Peel does get to decide how it will grow. And secondly, because the decision that Peel makes will have huge implications for whether Peel residents, present and future, can have the kind of life that they want. So I want to underline that Peel has a choice. As indicated in my earlier submissions, while the province was aiming to railroad suburban municipalities into sprawling onto greenfields, the planning regime itself fails to mandate that, because the inputs to each stage of the LNA process and methodology are uncertain, and most importantly, because they hang on policies that are entirely controlled by municipalities. There is discretion for Peel Region to accommodate all these new projected workplaces and residents within their existing neighborhoods and built-up neighborhoods. So as just one example of what I'm talking about, while the ministry and consultants were earlier dragging their feet on admitting this, Hamilton has now confirmed with them that single and semi-detached homes, the allocation for single and semi-detached homes, can be accommodated in the form of laneway and garden suites. And that is, each laneway and garden suites constitutes a separate single detached home for the LNA methodology purposes. And by facilitating the construction of a large number of laneway and garden suites, structuring your rules to make them happen rather than just to get in the way of them, you can sop up a lot of your demand. And secondly, and this is Mr. Gagnon's, I'm sorry, but he's just got very horrible luck. The second example is illustrated by the proposal that he brought to your attention. Simply by altering zoning and opening the door to more modest single and semi-detached homes, Peel Region can accommodate its entire population allocation within its boundaries. And I mean, there may be some walk-ups here and there required as well, within In the town of Caledon East, just as an example, most of the existing post-war neighborhoods have densities between 10 and 20 people per hectare. So for example, the blocks, and I'm going to get in the weeds, the blocks adjoining Larry Street, and I know this because as a lawyer, I had an application there long ago, or not long ago. They have a density between 10 and 20 people, 17.5. Right now, the current zoning is calculated to maintain those extraordinarily low densities, which are 1/5 the density that we see in neighborhoods that support active transportation, local business, that allow people to get by without cars. Caledon can, simply by changing these bylaws and practices, accommodate every resident that Mr. Gagnon would want us to accommodate in greenfield subdivisions twice or three times over in these existing blocks, while still retaining an entirely low-rise, ground-related character. It is absurd for Mr. Gagnon, and it would be obscene for this committee to entertain expanding the settlement area as he proposes and as others are proposing without using the capacity and bringing these existing neighborhoods somewhere closer to densities that support active transportation, that allow people to get by without cars, which is what you need to do in order to meet Peel Region's climate targets. Peel Region's LNA choice will have profound consequences for its residents. It will destroy farmland if you sprawl outwards, but it will also squander Peel's best chance to fix what's wrong with its existing neighborhoods. Most of Peel's existing neighborhoods don't have the density and mixes of uses that they require to support active transportation and businesses within walking distance. It is not the case that people are living in these car-dependent neighborhoods because that's the lifestyle they want. And I know this, not just in my heart, I know this because we conducted $20,000 worth of polling. And we found out that 80% of Peel's existing residents with an opinion say they would much prefer to live in a neighborhood where they didn't need to use their car to do shopping, recreation, entertainment, or commutes to work or school, if only price were an issue. However, only 85% of your residents, despite that, find themselves living in actual neighborhoods where they feel they can't get by without driving their car. You have a problem in existing Peel neighborhoods. The planning of the past was badly done. You did not get the densities that you needed. This is your opportunity to fix it. The existing neighborhoods need this existing density. Not just to save the farmland, but to avoid squandering what could be the best and last chance to fix Peel's existing neighborhoods, to get your active transportation modal share up. You should be putting the brakes on the current process and developing a fixed urban boundary, intensification-based option, and giving everyone an opportunity to debate these two alternative futures.
Do I assume you've completed your presentation?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, and do I have a question from Councillor Innes?
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation today. Always interesting. You alluded to suggesting that perhaps we hold off until the next provincial election to see if the plans and the growth targets would hold steady. Are you then suggesting that the Liberals would abandon the idea of having a ratio of development between greenfield and intensification, considering the fact that their current leader was a member of cabinet when this was approved by that provincial government?
What I can, I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm muted or not. What I can tell you is that every environmental NGO, every major environmental NGO has got together on a joint submission to all of the provincial parties. The unified voice of environmental defense, Greenpeace, every organization, environmental organization that you can note, they are all jointly asking the provincial parties to make that commitment.
But none of them have confirmed that they would make that commitment.
The existing urban to accommodate all.
Sorry, Chair, I can't hear him. Could he just say yes or no? Has any of the political parties conceded to this notion within their platform? Because I haven't seen it anywhere.
Listen. I'm not sure. I didn't
Just yes or
exactly
no.
hear your question. I'm sorry. I didn't hear your question because you broke up.
Have any of the provincial political parties incorporated your request into their platform for the upcoming election? Because I haven't heard it.
Phil?
The parties haven't released those platforms, but I tell you this: just wait and see. Wait and see.
Okay, so I thank you for answering my question. I have a concern about waiting and seeing because when we wait and see, that's when developers plan our communities, and I do not support developer planned communities. Caledon and Peel should be planning our communities. My other question to you in regards
so what you should do is develop.
Sorry, Mr. Pothen. Question to you. No, not a question, a statement. In regards to the organization you represent, Environmental Defense, I do know that they were very active during the Greenbelt. Can you confirm that they, whether or not they supported the Greenbelt lines that were drawn within the region of Peel?
I'm sorry, but that's long before my time. I'm sorry, I'm a millennial here, so I was not around at the time. But what I can say is that the position of environmental defense, for as long as I'm aware, has been that a much larger area should be included in the Greenbelt. And it is the position in particular of this campaign now that the remaining White Belt area within the GTA, we know now that we can accommodate future growth within existing neighborhoods and that we need to do it. And so that the White Belt area adjoining existing settlements should be added to the Green Belt.
It's unfortunate that you guys didn't speak up many years ago. Yeah. Thank you for your advocacy now. It's unfortunate that you didn't speak up years ago when our community was requesting that support, unfortunately, but thank you.
I was a student years ago, sorry.
Chair, we can't hear you. You're still muted.
Councillor Parrish, you're muted.
Somebody's muting me, and probably for good reason. Councillor Innes, would you please move receipt of this delegation?
I will, thank you.
Thank you. And 4.7, we have Rahul Mehta, resident City of Mississauga, on urban boundary and COVID recovery. Rahul, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Nice to see you, Councillor Parrish, and hello, members of council. Is it okay if I start my short presentation?
Please.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time, everyone. And it's great to hear from other passionate residents and researchers about why we need to hold the urban boundary. Creating a Howard boundary line has already been spoken to. I'm not sure how much this council has looked at what the region of Waterloo is doing. I did study planning there a few years ago, and I was quite inspired to learn about not just holding the line between the relationship of the rural and urban areas, but the community there actually celebrates this. They have a festival around holding the line. They understand the value of farmland right next door as something that is a neighbor rather than something that is a distant commodity which is shipped into their city to provide for them. It's unfortunate that we're at a place in the region of Peel where that conversation, that idea does not even exist in the public imagination. We understand food coming into our cities through a grocery store, not in farmland. We understand it coming in a truck, not in a bicycle or a local small vehicle. We imagine that food in all of our farmers markets is local. And the sad truth is a lot of it is not. And that is due to the increasing distance of that food, as well as the nature of where some of that comes from in the Ontario Food Terminal. When we're looking at the big picture, sprawl is not the answer. And I'm speaking to the big picture because the regional council here, I think you have the capacity to do that. Sprawl never was the answer. And to Councillor Parrish and the councillors from Mississauga, I speak to you in particular, and to the councillors in Brampton. You know that we have made mistakes. Our former Mayor McCallion has admitted this. We have created winding streets and dead-end streets which make transit to its fullest an impossibility. We have narrow lanes which make transit corridors an impossibility. Dundas and Lakeshore are stuck to this day because of our past planning mistakes. Are we going to continue the perpetuation of these modes and planning by expanding the urban boundary? Right now, it is impossible to meet our current climate targets, let alone the more ambitious climate targets set by that example, the region of Waterloo. The majority of municipalities and townships there have now signed on to something called 50 by 30, which is a 50% reduction by 2030. That is well beyond what we are aiming for. And that is a challenge we need to think about right now. So the challenge I'm raising to you is the challenge of climate change, the challenge of what we need right now, the residents living here now, and the reality of COVID and how it has upended the current projections in growth and planning. Building further out means even more infrastructure. It means more hot, dark pavement spread further to service high energy facilities and low to medium density housing. We don't want condominiums in Caledon, and we can't expect that. The density is not going to come there, even if we were to sprawl. What will come is car and truck traffic. The majority of residents, you can do the polling. I am a resident. I don't have the money for it. You can ask them. They do not want sprawl to continue. They want local food, and they want investment in their communities now. Why do I have to wait until 2050 to get a minimum grid for walking and cycling? Is it reasonable to tell residents like myself that rent for a couple of years, then you'll run out of money and go to Barrie? Or keep using the local bus, even if it's infrequent, get a car, and when you retire, you will have that minimum grid to walk and cycle. The real challenge with these mandates to conform by July 1st, 2022 with the province is that they are no longer realistic with the reality of COVID. The region has been advised to not ask for an extension or delay, and I understand that, but the region is capable of saying we are going to rethink and reimagine how we can do density right within the cities where we have made mistakes, humbly spoken, in the city of Mississauga, in the city of Brampton. We are not going to lose this last slice of beautiful farmland and natural areas which are connecting the town of Caledon. It is remarkable to me how many layers of policy hold together this conformity. You have local, regional, and the provincial government all saying we have to get this done by 2022, planning 30 years into the future. And yet we're not doing the same thing to address the vital signs proposed by the United Way. Why are most of the region's own 20-year outcomes showing declining? This is on the Region of Peel website. Why are we still not getting closer to building our minimum grid for walking and cycling? There are 0 protected, safe corridors for walking or cycling anywhere in the region of Peel. Why are we not planning for today? I know we should plan for the future, but right now it is a COVID time. We need to bring back the precautionary principle into planning. We were not prepared for COVID, even though we could have been, and we've seen the issues in the US and Canada in that regard. And we've seen how conservative governments in particular, now that includes Ontario, were particularly slow and ineffective in their response. There's been a roller coaster of openings and closures, and businesses have been hit hard, as have the many families which have tragically seen sickness and lives lost. So if we're not preparing for the reality of COVID here in the present, and we're not even considering COVID for our regional planning that will affect us to 2051, are we seriously going to say that the current plans and intensification targets are a realistic proposal to a public that is struggling right now? Our modal split numbers and future projections, they hold no water. Our growth forecasts hold no water. Our housing mix needs and zoning plans do not hold water. And our small business numbers, those that have survived, we don't know what's left. They do not hold water. Between 2019 and today, and likely to continue for several years, these forecast models and the policies tied to them, they do not hold water. This is a scary and frustrating reality, and I understand councillors may not be willing to admit this or may not be sure what to do next. But to say instead of pausing this logic of sprawl and addressing our climate, natural areas, and agricultural impacts, to continue this model of linear growth and sprawl into our natural areas, rather than to address the present needs of the massive affordable housing waitlist, of the lack of modal split, how few people, it's not even a rounding error, how few people walk or bike to work. It's for recreation only. How many decades do I have to wait, my future family, before I leave this region in frustration because we did not make the attempt today to solve for a better future? This conformity requirement does not force the region to sprawl. It does not force the region to build warehouses into Caledon and to build low to medium density housing in Caledon and the fringes of Brampton. This is an opportunity for the region, and I implore you, I understand you as councillors. You have been there, you have done that. You have seen the mistakes and the successes in your urban boundaries. Please do not expand the urban boundary. Mandate affordable housing, mandate a green roof bylaw, mandate a doubling of the targets and funding for safe cycling and walking infrastructure, and mandate connections where there are so many dead-end roads within our existing built area. I want us to get the region of Peel right before we continue to expand outwards and claim we're making space for the middle class or for new residents. Please think of the people here. This is not NIMBYism. This is about getting things right now, being honest about COVID, and preparing then for the future in the coming elections as we finally get the updated targets, projections, and forecasts, which make sense based on what has happened during this global pandemic. We can't delay. The province is mandating us. What we can do is take a second sober second thought, my apologies, at what we are doing to the precious farmland and natural areas left. I know you care about future generations. What I'm asking you to do is to look once more at the present generation. I am here now, and I'm going to be here for a long time. I want to live, work, and play in my region, and it is just not possible right now, today, because I'm going to go bankrupt just trying to pay rent. This is my challenge to you, Council. You might not all be here for several more terms, but you are here now and you have a chance to set the stage for those to come after you, those elected officials. And we will say we, like the region of Waterloo, no celebrations required, no decades of back and forth as they fought, but we are going to learn from their best practice. We are going to hold the line, and we're going to try to create a respectable, neighborly relationship between the urban and rural areas. We are going to start prioritizing local seriously within our policy. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I don't see any questions. Councillor Starr, will you move receipt of the delegation? Thank you. Seeing no objections, thank you, Rahul. Next is 4.8, Diva Aurora, and it's on from Community Climate Council, and again on settlement area boundaries. I see somebody named Grace, but I don't see anybody named Diva. Grace, are you on?
It's me. Yep. My colleagues, Grace and LJ, will actually be starting the presentation. So.
Okay, you've got 10 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're from the political advocacy team on the Community Climate Council. So we're a youth-funded nonprofit organization promoting climate literacy and political advocacy in Peel Region. We have over 30 members aged 18 to 30, representing all 3 municipalities in Peel. My name is Grace. I'm at the ripe age of 20 years old, and I'm from Ward 5 of Mississauga, represented by Councillor Ron Starr. Ward 6.
And my name is Lanthan, or LJ. I'm 25 years old, and I'm from Ward 9 of Brampton. Now, as the slide mentions, we do not support the settlement area boundary expansion for the region of Peel. We believe that the process does not adequately represent public feedback and contradicts the climate action plans as endorsed by each municipality, which further puts into question the health and demands of our community. We are here to ask the Peel Region Planning and Growth Management Committee to stop the proposed urban boundary expansion and instead work with the residents of Peel Region to implement sustainable alternatives for growth management instead. Next slide, please.
First off, let's talk about what makes a healthy community, as defined by the region of Peel. Starting at the top is natural environment and sustainability. The proposed urban boundary expansion does not protect our sensitive land, nor does it care about environmental sustainability. Expansion means more concrete, more cars, and more emissions instead of trees, meadows, and agricultural land.
Moving to the right, the urban boundary expansion is not a strategic use of our precious land at all. It prioritizes urbanization by paving over agricultural land for the sake of building more single-family homes. It's an open invitation for urban sprawl.
Next in blue, we have mobility. Since the expansion is on the outskirts of the region, mobility will inevitably be reduced as the population will have to use cars to commute back into the city. Caledon already has a serious lack of public transit, and decisions like this will inevitably tie Caledon's growth to proceed in the same manner as Brampton and Mississauga, where they'll be dealing with congestion and road expansion 20 years down the road because they didn't learn from their neighbors' mistakes and innovate instead.
Similarly, service proximity would be reduced. The expansion would make things less walkable and increase reliance on cars for individuals living in the expanded area. People would be further away from their jobs, from friends and family and entertainment. If we really want to improve service proximity, we need to put more focus on our next point, density.
Expansion is the direct opposite of density. Peel Region's promise of improving urban density is all for naught if we go through with this urban boundary expansion and promote low density living at the cost of green space.
And that brings us to contiguous expansion. Though this boundary expansion may seem logical at a glance, in actuality, it is just not needed. There is room within our existing urban boundary for the projected growth in the Peel region.
Finally, we have food systems. There is no way that paving over agricultural lands could increase access to local, fresh, and nutritious foods. This point is extremely important in the face of a climate emergency where droughts and extreme weather conditions are ruining harvests around the globe. We need to adapt and improve our local food systems so that we can be more self-sufficient. Next slide, please.
Now, this map of Peel shows just how far we have to go to address the 7 principles of a healthy city. The darker brown in area, the more these principles are met. It is absolutely horrific to see how much of our region is painted in the light pink. Citizens have a right to live in a healthy community. Young people like us will continue to live in unhealthy communities as a result of the decisions you are making now. What sense does it make to not only live in unhealthy communities, but to further expand these unhealthy communities? We should be focusing on increasing our resiliency here, not wasting money by moving out there. Next slide, please.
There were 4 public consultations 9 months ago, and since then, while the project has been adjusted, there has been no chance for public feedback. Even the public feedback that has been presented through delegations at these committee meetings have not been acted on or have just been largely disregarded. Residents are feeling ignored.
Next slide, please. Now, furthermore, we can clearly see the inequity in participation at these past public consultations through these 3 images. As you can see on the left image, at the first consultation, 1/3 of the participants weren't even from Peel, and the developing/building industry had the highest turnout in comparison to other stakeholders. Now, it would not be an exaggeration to say that the suggestions from these consultations are more indicative of developers' wishes rather than that of citizens.
Now, consultation 2 in the middle image shows the developer and building industry with the same level of turnout as residents at 43%. And in both consultations 2 and 3, which is on the right, half the people were not from Peel. If they don't even live here, why are we moving forward without further consultations that are actually representative of what the people who live in Peel want? This makes us seriously question who is deciding the future of Peel region. Next slide, please.
This was an archaeological assessment conducted by ASI as part of the required studies of the SABE. In yellow are potential indigenous sites, and as the text notes at the bottom, approximately 91.4% of the expansion area exhibits some potential for the presence of indigenous and/or Euro-Canadian archaeological resources. We can do land acknowledgements all we want, but these mean nothing if there is no transparency from this committee and from staff members that indigenous peoples have been thoroughly consulted on the expansion. The Community Climate Council stands in solidarity with the indigenous people that live in Peel region. And for that reason, as allies, we would like to make sure that indigenous voices are acknowledged for this matter. Next slide, please.
The expansion also paves over prime agricultural land, as shown in red here. Agriculture is repeatedly marked as a key guiding principle for sustainability in Mississauga, Brampton, and Caledon's action plans, yet the first chance we get, we're willing to pave it all over. Next slide, please.
Now, for our remaining remarks, please stop sharing the screen. We also want to add that according to the SABE Employment and Commercial Opportunities Technical Study, much of the employment land that is to be gained from the urban boundary expansion will be given to industrial type jobs, which include manufacturing, warehousing, distribution, and wholesale trade. This is concerning for 3 reasons.
Firstly, these industrial type jobs are low density, meaning they take up a lot of land and require a fair bit of spacing, and they're almost always located in single-story buildings. These jobs also produce a lot of greenhouse gas emissions.
Secondly, automation is taking over many of these jobs already. If we're looking at this in terms of future employment, do we really want to prioritize an industry that is most at risk of being phased out by automation?
Thirdly, speaking as a youth of the Peel region, these industrial type jobs are not appealing to the people in my age group. By prioritizing industrial type jobs, Peel region is at risk of losing its educated youth to nearby cities like Toronto, which have better employment prospects in the environmental, tech, and healthcare industries.
The last message we want to leave you with is the fact that Peel, Brampton, Mississauga, and Caledon all have climate action plans approved in October 2019, December 2019, September 2020, and April 2021, respectively. They all declared a climate emergency in 2019.
It has been 2 years since that declaration, and we have yet to see any action that actually suggests they understand the urgency part of a climate emergency. Let's make sure that this plan doesn't make the same mistake. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. A lot of work went into that. I don't see any questions. Councillor Vicente, could you move receipt, please? Thank you. No objections. Thank you very much. And our last delegation is Paul Lowe's, Principal, SGL Planning and Design, Inc. And it's to do with Wildfield Village in the urban area boundary of the region of Peel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. I believe I have a presentation. Wonderful. Thank you. So I'm a principal with SGL Planning and Design, and we represent the Wildfield Village Landowners Group. And I just want to talk today not about an application, Madam Chair, but how your proposed urban settlement expansion could be developed. And we're providing a concept. We've done a fair amount of work. And if we could go to the next slide, please, clerk. I just want to talk about where it's at, how it relates to your studies and the work we've done. So the lands, as you see, are in red, are approximately 330 hectares. They're bound by Healy Road and the Greenbelt Plan to the north. To the east is Gore Road. To south is Mayfield Road and the city of Brampton. West is Centerville Creek. And you see that it's located midway between Bolton and Tullamore. If we go to the next slide, please. This is a map of your SOBS study, and the red dashed line shows this area that we're talking about, the Wildfield Village. In it, SOBS study identified it as community lands. It also made a number of findings about these areas. It said it represents a logical westward expansion of Bolton, closely linked to Brampton's existing residential neighborhoods, as I'll show you in a moment. Suitable for extensions of water and infrastructure and transportation, and I'll show you in a moment, it's a logical, easy extension just to the north. And the long-term viable agriculture uses in this area is doubtful. That's what the study concluded. If we go to the next slide, please. This shows just a high level of the concept embedded in the local context. And you can see along, it's not very clear, but you can see the arrows along Mayfield Road. We can see Bolton and Tullamore just to the east and the west. Those areas are proposed to expand in terms of the employment around those. So we've got a new residential community that could be a true live-work community. Those that need to go further afield for jobs, Highway 427 is just to the east, Highway 410 is just to the west, easy transportation. We've orientated the higher densities along the arterial roads to create true transit supportive development. So roads could be extended along transit could be extended along Gore, McVean, so to serve the area. And also, what's key is we've shown collector roads, so a good integration with Brampton to the south with the collector roads extension. We also have east-west collector roads extending so to connect to the new communities to the east and west and to the employment area in Tullamore and over to Bolton. If we can go to the next slide, I want to zoom in to show you what the concept could look like. Central to this concept is a mixed-use village. We're really trying to create a village here. We have a village center in the middle of the community, a central park as part of that village. You see the grid system of streets to create a true walkable community. You'll see the higher density in orange, so that's the medium density along the arterial roads for transit supportability. And then we have the collector roads, north-south collector roads going into the Vales of Humber community to the south, east-west collector roads, all resulting in a population of approximately 6,700 new residents, almost equally split between low density and multiple units. So really creating a mix of housing forms. And achieves the density of 65 residents and jobs per hectare for a total of 21,000 residents and jobs. Next slide, please. Just drilling down a little bit more into what this community could look like. We have 10 parks potentially here, with all of the residential areas being within a 5-minute walk of parks, potentially up to 3 elementary schools, 1 secondary school. You see the village center is within a 15-minute walk of much of the community, and that is key because a walkable community is, the new concept is a 15-minute neighborhood. In other words, you can walk 15 minutes to get to all your services. In this community, we get all the day-to-day services within a 15-minute walk. And that is key to climate change. This community, your new communities, can address climate change. They can address climate change by walkability, transit supportability. We're also addressing affordable housing by having a full range of market-based housing. The village center, our concept, would include retail, restaurants, personal service, community facilities, all within that walkability, 15-minute walk from anywhere in the neighborhood. Next slide, please. Some of our studies have looked at, and I should say we've also submitted a detailed report to you on all of the studies that I've done. That's a Why Wildfield, which was submitted with my delegation. You'll see a report on agriculture environment. The agricultural analysis confirmed that there's no specialty crop in this area. It's mostly common field crops and similar agricultural capabilities to other lands in the White Belt. You'll notice on the slide that I showed you previously, there's very few significant natural heritage features. There's 1 woodlot wetland, 2 small stream corridors. The rest are in the Greenbelt Plan to the north and to the east. Next slide, please. We see the servicing and servicing on these slides. Water and wastewater are simply just to the south. Water goes along Mayfield Road. The sanitary lines can be extended north. I've already talked about transportation. So this community could be serviced very quickly at a very low cost. Next slide, please. So just to sum up, why Wildfield Village? We believe that these lands in your SAB expansion area are consistent and conform to all the policy of the province, the region, and the town. They create a complete community that meets the growth demands of the town and the region. They establish a natural and logical continuation of growth from Bolton to the east, Brampton to the south, and we believe can really address how new communities could be developed. This is not sprawl. Development of a mixed-use community such as this at 65 persons and jobs per hectare, transit-supportive, walkable community, that is not urban sprawl. Urban sprawl is low-density, unplanned growth. So our final ask for you is that the Wildfield Village Landowners Group requests that their lands continue to be included and identified. It's a logical first phase of western expansion from Bolton through the Peel 2041 plus SOB process in order to accommodate projections of 2051. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and that concludes my presentation.
One hand up with disappeared. Councillor Thompson, did you have or Mayor Thompson, did you have a question?
You know what? I can talk to Mr. Lowe anytime on this, so let's just keep moving. We're really tight on time, so this is something we can definitely have off the record, so not a problem.
Okay, so you'll move receipt?
Yes, I will.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. Thank you for your delegation, and no questions is probably just as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your time.
You're most welcome. Okay, we are now going to 5.1, which is, I think, a really crucial report. I've been through it myself a couple times. It's on front-end funding and financing options. It's here for information. And I've been in contact with Catherine Lockyer on looking at, for September, changing the terms of reference of this committee so that we can run business meetings and get through our agendas and then have public input meetings as a separate event, which doesn't require quorum. She's looking through it for me. The input is important, it's valuable, so we don't want to cut it out, nor can we. But I think we're going to have to just tighten this up. Everybody's talking about the fact we can't get through it, and they don't want us to get through it. But the only way to do it is to tighten up these agendas. So is someone going to be presenting front-end funding and financing options?
Yes,
Really?
Madam Chair. Tara Bontemacero and Craig Binning.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Tara Bonpincero, and I will be providing a brief introduction to the front-end funding and financing options item on the agenda today. The presentation today will be jointly delivered by myself and Craig Binning from Hempson. In addition to staff from Regional Planning and Growth Management, we're also joined by Julia Saraki, also from Hempson, and our finance colleagues today. Everyone available to help answer any questions on the report or presentation. Next slide, please. The presentation today will cover the background information that has brought us to the report here today, as well as the current situation. Following that, Craig Binning will provide an overview of the fiscal tools, the jurisdictional scan, and an overview of the best practices and lessons learned from other municipalities' use of these tools based on their study. And lastly, we'll cover next steps. Next slide, please. This report and presentation is responding to the request from Planning and Growth Management Committee from March 18th of this year to report back to a future committee meeting with information on front-end financing and area-specific development charges or other servicing financial agreements available during planning and development. To respond to this direction, Hempson Consulting was retained to prepare an overview of the various front-end funding and financing tools, their advantages and disadvantages, and lessons learned from other jurisdictions that have also used these tools. Next slide, please. The region currently implements an integrated approach to planning, servicing, and financing tools through Peel's growth management strategy. Front-end funding and financing tools are one part of the overall regional strategy. Peel currently has a corporate policy on front-end financing agreements and developer reimbursements, and also has existing policies to enable using these financial tools included in the regional official plan. I'm now going to turn it over to Craig Binning to provide an overview of the work they prepared. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Tara. And Madam Chair, it's a pleasure to be before the committee this afternoon. I'm going to just cover off at a high level these 6 tools that we have on this slide. I'm not going to read them off as I'm going to spend a bit of time with each of them. And I just want to stress that the accompanying memo provides additional details on each of the tools and some examples. So just moving on to the next slide and dealing with area-specific development charges. Both the region and all of the area municipalities currently employ what we refer to as municipal-wide development charges, which means that development occurring anywhere within either the region or the local municipalities pays the same development charge. What we do with area rating is often they're layered in on top. And the idea here is that they are to reflect areas that are developing that may have different costs than the average that's being incurred across the municipal jurisdictions. They're often used when we're introducing or expanding greenfield areas or new development areas. Examples include Windsor, which recently expanded its area to include what is referred to as the Sandwich South area, or some of you may know as the airport area. Barrie as well recently used it as it indexed or acquired additional lands from Innisfil. The advantages to using area-specific charges is it ensures that those that are benefiting from specific works will pay for those, especially when they're outside of the average costing experienced throughout the other part of the municipality. It also allows the municipalities to ensure that the municipal-wide charges remain lower and that the existing development frameworks of the built-up areas aren't paying for the expansion of services into new areas. One thing that it doesn't do is it doesn't eliminate the need for municipal debt. It can help mitigate and manage some of that, but it still can require the region or the municipality to need to front end this. Typically, ASDCs, as we refer to them, are used in greenfield areas, but there are some exceptions to that. Moving on to the next slide, what I'll refer to as formal front-ending agreements. And why I'm using the word formal is that these are done under Section 42 of the Development Charges Act. The reality is that there's not too many examples of this because it's a highly prescriptive requirement under the legislation for giving notification, providing separate public meetings, and the appeal rights are quite broad under this. However, they are used and they do facilitate allowing for developers or a developer to front end the provision of certain infrastructure and then provides a mechanism for them to recover their cost against other benefiting landowners. The region of Halton has used this as part of their allocation process. The City of Ottawa as well has a front-ending agreement policy that is structured under Section 44 of the Act, but used relatively limitedly. The advantages to this is it does shift the risk from the municipality to the developer for the timing and the cost of the works. It does allow for the timely construction of infrastructure. The disadvantages to these formal front-ending agreements is, as I indicated, they're highly prescriptive and they can become quite administratively onerous for the municipality. It also can result in the developer taking control over shares of the capital program and making decisions about the timing of infrastructure and phasing. So just moving on to what is a slight variation on the formal front-ending agreements is what I'm going to refer to as single or developer front-end financing arrangements. So these are not done under Section 44 of the Act, but are still permitted under the Development Charges Act. And it's less prescriptive to do it in this way. It's a very similar process in which an individual developer or a group of developers who is willing to front-end fund some of the works necessary to allow lands to open up can place those works, pay for them, and then they can receive credits against their own development charges payable, or they can also receive credits as other lands develop and other benefiting owners. So effectively, it's working in the same way that's anticipated under the formal front-ending agreements, but done in a bit more of a less prescriptive manner. The advantages here is that, once again, it allows for the sharing of risk between the municipality and the developer. It's less administratively onerous than Section 44 front-ending agreements while maintaining the same kinds of benefits. It can, however, result in, once again, the developers influencing the timing of capital infrastructure. It may result in some infrastructure being implemented earlier than when anticipated and not fully utilized, which can have some negative operating cost impacts in that perhaps the infrastructure is not fully utilized. Also, some of the non-growth related components can place additional burden on the property tax rates or the utility rates. If there is a significant non-growth component of some of these works, it advances those and can compete with other financing needs of the region or the municipalities. Just moving on to some other ideas on the next slide then. There's a notion of development charge prepayment agreements. I think as many of you are aware in the committee, development charges are typically paid at the time of issuance of the building permit, which can be quite late in the stage for hard infrastructure. Sometimes charges can be collected at the signing of a subdivision agreement or earlier stages. But what the Section 27 of the Development Charge Act allows is for a municipality to enter into an agreement with the developer for the payment of the development charges at some other point. And what has been done quite creatively by some municipalities, largely doing with large infrastructure projects like the expansion of a sewage treatment plant, is to say, we need you as a development community to come together and prepay a component of your development charges to bring us the money in earlier so that we can in place the works. It helps manage cash flow and provides a certain amount of certainty for the municipality in having the monies available. It mitigates the risk of low or slow growth because you're getting the money in advance. Some of the disadvantages to it is it can be quite complex to administer and also probably is not terribly applicable for a wide range of infrastructure types of works, but more for large scale projects. But it has been used quite effectively in some municipalities. And then moving on to another concept that I'll refer to as developer cost-sharing agreements. This is something that was much more common in the earlier part of my career and perhaps less common so now, and especially at the regional level. This is where a municipality goes out and says, well, we can't front-end fund all of these works. We need you as a development community to come together and to manage and deliver that infrastructure together and manage the costs yourselves. It was, as I said, done a lot more before the Development Charges Act, and some of the restrictions introduced in the 97 legislation have made this more difficult and problematic. However, it is an effective way of shifting risk from the municipality to the developer. There are some disadvantages, and historically it has been that maybe the municipality didn't have control over the quality of the infrastructure in place. That can be addressed through different mechanisms. However, I can come across very few examples of where this has been used at a regional level for the types of infrastructure that you might be dealing with moving forward, but I certainly would like to keep it in the mix of tools for consideration. And then just moving on to the final mechanism that we can use on the next slide. And this I'll refer to as municipal front-end funding or debt financing of work. So this is where it may not be possible to get a group of developers together to front-end works. And so the municipality itself might see it as being strategically and economically beneficial to front-end some of the works. And this often deals with major infrastructure, once again, like sewer treatment facilities and water supply arrangements. Of course, it puts a significant amount of pressure on the municipality or the region to provide for it. I would like to stress that when a municipality does front-end finance works itself, the principal costs plus the interest costs are recoverable from development charges. But the municipality is now acting as the bank. A very good example of this is York Region, who front-ended funded most of the water supply and wastewater treatment and linear infrastructure associated with providing capacity largely out to 2031 and now probably more like 2041 or 2051. Stark exemplar difference between how the region of Halton has addressed the provision of important infrastructure. Some of the advantages to this approach is the municipality maintains full control over the works, both in terms of the timing of it, the quality of it, and the delivery of that infrastructure. Also, I just want to stress again that all of the costs associated with delivering that development-related infrastructure are recoverable from development charges, including the full financing costs. Clearly, the main disadvantage here is that the municipality is bearing the full risk of the timing of infrastructure or the timing of development. So clearly, if development slows off, then you may not be collecting the development charge revenues necessary to meet all of the debt payments, especially when we experience economic shocks or downturns that can influence the patterns and rates of development. Another side point, which is sensitive to the region, who's done a good job at maintaining a good credit rating, is that sometimes when you take on additional debt, obviously some of the bond rating agencies will look at that and may lower the credit rating or put downward pressure on your credit rating that can have other fiscal consequences. So just on the next slide is a summary of all of those tools, lots of words and things there, but I just wanted to provide it to you and show it to you. It's also in the memo, and it just gives you a nice one-page sampling of all of the notions and ideas that I just went over with you. And I'm just going to pass it back to Tara, but I look forward to answering any questions that the committee might have. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Okay, so as far as next steps go, as part of this work, through the Peel 2041 Plus official plan review, draft policies have been proposed throughout the plan to emphasize the requirements for staging, phasing, and sequencing being required to be undertaken in consultation with the region to ensure new designated greenfield areas are developed in a manner that protects the financial well-being of the region and the local municipalities. As the committee is aware, one of the key components of the settlement area boundary expansion work is a fiscal impact analysis, which is being worked on and will be presented to committee likely in September. And then lastly, as work proceeds on the Peel 2041 Plus work and front-end financing options are assessed, staff will report back on the need to update the corporate policy as appropriate. That concludes our presentation, and there's a number of staff available to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Greatly appreciated. I have a few questions, but I'll go to Mayor Thompson first, or anybody else that has questions. Mayor Thompson? I can't hear you. You're doing a Carolyn.
Can you hear me now? I keep switching off. Thanks. Yeah, well, that's a new phrase. We'll coin that phrase, do a Carolyn. Thank you, Madam Chair. It's getting on in the afternoon, but I think the one thing is that's key, and I think it's how we frame it up. And I know since our front-end agreements, nothing's really changed since 2003 or written in the report. We've done a fair bit of it with Mayfield West, but one thing that we have learned from the first one to the second one is how you construct a landowner's agreement. You definitely need all the developers to be part of that process. And the one thing is our highest cost, let's face it, is water and wastewater and that infrastructure, especially moving into Caledon. I think it's essential that we have front-end loading agreements to help. It's to take the pressure off of Peel, but to help Peel as well. And it's a partnership. But I think with the landowner's agreement, both with the region, I think is a key. And I think that's the fault where it's gone wrong in Halton. We got too many separate water systems, too many separate wastewater systems, where in Peel we do still have our two wastewater and our big water plant. Yes, we have a couple little wells up in Caledon in the north end, but for the future development, it's coming from either Clarkson or G. Booth or from the water plant itself. So I think it's really key that we go forward is I think taking all those ideas, I really think it's time to go back and really look at that. And I think it's definitely got to be a partnership between the upper and lower tier. But I really appreciate the homework you've done on this. It's an excellent report. Carolyn says she's read through it several times. I've read through it once, but it's one of those things that I realize that anything that's going to get done in Caledon, we have to do it through a front-end load agreement to help alleviate the pressure for us to be able to move forward, and especially with the BRES, with the options now, the way with the settlement that has taken place from the LPAT. This is something that I think is essential, but at the end of the day, we're going to have all the players step up to the plate and be part of it, but also make sure that whoever's the ones that did step up and take responsibility are compensated. And having a trustee, I think, is definitely important through the landowner's agreement to manage this. But it does work well if it's framed up. But I like. Have you looked at how we've done our Mayfield West and our South Fields agreements?
It's a question to Craig.
Yep.
Yes, through the chair. I obviously haven't directly worked on those agreements. I have in the past looked at them and read them, and I think, as you said, the second rounds and those structures, and they deal with the critical points, and they are a fine example that we look to for best practices, yes.
But I really appreciate your input, but I'm just saying structurally, do you think this is time that both Caledon, Brampton, Mississauga work with Peel and figure out where we're going? A lot of it's already established, I know, in Mississauga, but I think this is something like a tripart, you know, the region, the town. For example, I'll use Caledon as an example, and the developer, you know, it's like a three-way agreement of an understanding of how we go forward for a whole big block area of whatever comes into an urban expansion versus these one-offs, similar to what happened with Melton.
Yes, just through the chair. I mean, one of the things I should have stressed at the beginning is that, you know, I would see the region and the local municipalities using a range of these tools. There's not one that's going to solve all of the problems, and you're going to want to use them collectively. I always encourage municipalities, especially in two-tier arrangements, to try to establish a set of policies and practices that work together. And I believe that that's what is being suggested here, and I would be supportive of that, of having a policy that has input both at the regional and the local level, and a coordination of those policies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's all I have. Like, I know time is tight. We got other things we got to deal with, but I think I got what I want out of this. Thank you.
You know, time is tight, but this is a very significant report because it's changed my mind. My first reaction has always been, I don't like them. I don't like front-end loading. And I also thought, or our staff thought in Mississauga, that nobody would go for area-specific DCs because it would look like, hey, Mississauga's getting off easy. It's not Mississauga that's getting off easy, and it's not Caledon's taking a hard drive at it. It's the developers. And the guys up in Caledon right now have bought the land cheaply, and they are looking to make a fortune on whatever we decide to allow them to develop. So they should darn well pay for it. So I have a couple of questions if no one else does. It says in our policy it was done in 2003 and it hasn't been upgraded, even though it was directed that it should be upgraded and refreshed. And I think probably it wasn't upgraded because we weren't using it at the region. If we do draft a new policy and we base it on the best that we can glean out of these other ones that are operating well, as you mentioned, Ottawa and a few others, is it the option still there once the policy's written in stone that we can say, yes, we'd like to do it here, but no, we're not ready to do it here? Will we always still have that option? Craig?
Through the chair, I'd be pleased to answer, and then staff may want to interject. I would suggest, yes, that what you would want to do is have a policy that has a range of tools that would be applicable in certain situations, and there may be criteria that approach, but there's also situations in which the status quo and just using a municipal-wide development charge approach would be appropriate and satisfied. So I think the circumstances of the particular infrastructure and the particular area will dictate which is the preferred tool to use and approach.
Okay, and Gary, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I see Janice is on as well. So I think, you know, for me, council can always do that. You've already got, for example, the federal agreement. So as you consider each policy, you'll decide who's got authority for what. And for example, the CFO has authority to enter into the federal agreement. And typically, if that happens, I would email you. But certainly, you can control that through the policy. I would mention though, the policy should indicate a signal and a direction probably to the community. And then, of course, the staff would probably be looking to apply that equally and fairly across the whole area. But yeah, I mean, council can absolutely decide who's got delegated authority on those types of decisions.
Thank you.
Janice? Sorry.
Janice, did you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, Gary covered off most of what I was going to say, but I think really what we need is a toolbox, and then we pick the right tool for the job. And I think that's what I see Mayor Thompson giving me a thumbs up, and I think that's what he was trying to communicate as well. So, you know, if it's a nail, we need a hammer. If it's a can of paint, we need a paintbrush, right? And so what Craig has really mapped out is there are a range of ways that we can approach these issues. And I think what we have to do as we look at our planning, and Tara talked about the fact that, you know, we have to do the financial impact study. Part of that will be looking at an estimate. I mean, it's really cost and timing. When is it going to be required? And then who is going to pay for it? And what we have now is a range of tools that we can look at to answer the second question, which is who's going to pay for it. How much risk are we prepared to assume as a municipality, and how much of that risk do we want to? Are we going to say, you know what, that's beyond our threshold of comfort? We're not going to be prepared to recommend that to council, and so therefore we need to now work with the development community to understand if that risk can be shared. So these are all. I think they are theoretical in the beginning, so we will be looking at the estimates of the financial impact. We'll be putting our toolbox together, and then from there, it really will be looking at you know, who wants to build where and when, and then which of the tools is applicable to that particular scenario. I think always, though, at the end of the day, and if you look at Halton or any of the other municipalities, the really important thing is we need to be in control. We need to ensure that we're making decisions that are in the best interest of Peel, the community, respecting our official plan, and moving things forward so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where you know, others are making decisions for us. And I think Craig pointed that out in his analysis, and that's really something that we'll have to pay attention to.
Thank you. And I see Patrick O'Connor has his hand up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just from a legal perspective, if you look at the individual tools in the toolbox, the legal discretion of the region to enter into these or not use them is very clear. Nobody can force us to use an area-specific bylaw, development charge bylaw. Nobody could force us to enter into a front-ending agreement. The policy, though, will have the effect of creating expectations in the development community. A certain reliance will develop, and you will have, as a result, I think, practically speaking, an imperative to follow through on the policy directive. So while the policy does not constrain you legally, it has certain practical effects, even though you retain your legal discretion to use any of the tools at any given time.
Thank you. Questions I had, and it's all in the same package, and I'll go back to you, Alan, in a second. What we're talking about mostly is pre-servicing, hard services, water, wastewater, roads. There also are libraries, there's also rec centers, there's all the soft services that come out of DCs. So would you have to craft a bylaw or an agreement that would specify which of the services that we would allow them to do in advance, and then when you eventually collect the DCs on their building permit stage, let's say our DC prices have gone up, how would you deal with that? Because we're still going to be collecting soft services. It's not an all or nothing, I assume.
But those are for the lower tier municipalities. So yeah, but I mean, in your agreements with the developers, you would have to be very explicit. I'm sure Patrick can weigh in. You would have to be very explicit about what is being built and how it's being financed. And I mean, at this stage, by and large, the regional DCs or the regional financial arrangements would be for regional infrastructure, which in our case, roughly 80% of it, as I understand it, is water, wastewater. And I mean, roads are a little different. While there might be a need for road infrastructure, you know, if it's road widenings or things like that, you tend to have a little bit more discretion in terms of timing. Water, wastewater, unfortunately, if the servicing is not there, then the development can't proceed. So I would suggest that for the most part, as we're dealing with these issues and as we're looking at all of these different tools and risks, we're really dealing with how do we manage the requirement to put in water, wastewater infrastructure, which has to be done up front. It does not, and again, Patrick can speak to it, but in my mind, it would have no bearing on the local municipalities' development charges that they would collect for the services that they're responsible for.
Good. Okay, thank you. Patrick, did you want to add something?
No, I think that's essentially correct.
Okay. Alan, do you have another question?
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. The one thing is it's the hard services that I'm really saying that's where we really need the front end loading on. And where I'm coming from is a really good example is if you got the developers paying towards it, you know things are going to happen. And Ron Starr, you'll know this for a fact. When I was chair and you were vice chair of Public Works, look at the push we got out of Brampton. We got to get that Mississauga Road sewer going. We got to get everything going. We got everything built up there, which is good, and widen the bridge and everything at Mississauga Road, remember? And Bavard. But our biggest challenge is nothing's happened, really. You know, there's some development, but not a whole lot. And the region's sitting there with a huge debt load wanting that west side to go, right? So here we are, we've built this all out there and nothing. And if you got the developers got skin in the game, they're going to build it. Yeah, if you know what I mean. So I think this is where we've been stuck in Peel is certain areas, and I'm not pecking on Brampton, please, but I'm just using it as an example. If you had skin in the game, I can assure you that whole area would look a lot different today than it would. And for Caledon, to make that commitment, we're running those pipes, those extra kilometers to get where we need to go, at least with the developers that have the skin in the game. They're going to build it and they're going to get her done. And I think that's the one thing with the partnerships we definitely need is we can't afford to keep subsidizing these guys carrying that debt. I know they're supposedly paying the interest and everything, but we're wearing it. You know, we've got that debt at the region carrying that forward. So I'm just saying is I think it's just another way to help get it delivered on time. And it's another tool in the toolbox, but there's a mindset there that it's a partnership that we know that they got skin in the game, they're going to deliver on it. And I think I'm just using, and please, Brampton, don't get upset. I'm just trying to use that as an example. There's many other cases similar, but that is one that Ron and I definitely know. Look at how the push we were getting on that, right, Ron? Trying to get it up from Queen Street to Bavard, and look where we're at, right? So I'm just using that as an example. And how many years ago was that?
Okay, Uncle Ron, do you want to contribute?
I thought the report was excellent because it delved into areas that sometimes the politicians don't want to talk about. And I think especially now, with the cost of infrastructure and with the growth we're experiencing, we have to think out of the box. And there's times, and I can think of one instance where, and there's another one happening right now, by the way, I won't say which city, but if a developer in a city can get together and they have to do infrastructure, and the developer is willing to pay a premium by deferring his tax or his development charges for a little while, why wouldn't you do that? I mean, sometimes, well, we can't do it, you know, and there's so many ideas sometimes that are brought forward by the people, and we as politicians don't look at those ideas. And some of those things you brought up today, Craig, are, you know, that's common sense. I mean, it's not even brand new. They've been around for years. But the point is, how do you effectively come through with that and work together as a partnership, as the mayor has said? To me, if somebody came to me and said, listen, I want to defer my charges by a year, but I'm willing to pay you those charges that are in place plus 1 or 2 or 3 or 5% on top of that. You know, and in the big developments, you're talking millions of dollars. And so, to me, the discussion, you know, you could go on for the whole afternoon on this, but I just think, thank you very much. I wrote down some things here that you talked about, and it's just great that we are able to think out of the box. So keep it up. Thanks.
I guess the question I've got is, I don't know if our staff is leaning towards putting a tool in the toolbox called area-specific DCs. And do we need a motion of any kind to pursue this further and perhaps look at a combination of front-end loading agreements in other municipalities and come back at the full council and have a look at it and have a report done there? Or are we, I see Adrian Smith's got his hand up. No face, but the hand is up. Adrian?
Sorry about that. Thank you, Councillor. I was just going to build on, Tara mentioned some of the next steps that we have planned as part of our overall municipal comprehensive review and sort of doing the financial analysis and looking at this. We're going to be reporting back on the financial analysis in September, and also there's another report on the agenda today that's got some initial directions on where we're heading with some of our policy work on growth management and our settlement boundary expansion work. And you can see in those policies the beginnings of some stronger framework for the region in putting some gates and policies in place around when development occurs, some decision making about staging, phasing of infrastructure, and the financing of that infrastructure. So I think sort of through those processes, through our MCR, and through sort of looking at those policies and having the evaluation of some of the financial implications of the overall municipal comprehensive review, those conversations are going to come. And I also think that you know, as we move on and once we get sort of through this municipal comprehensive review stage, we're going to be thinking about implementation. We've mentioned to council that, you know, one of the first things that comes from, you know, wherever we land with our overall evaluation of growth and where that growth should go, comes things like updating our master plans and you know, for water, wastewater, and for roads and other regional infrastructure, and flowing from that, you know, an update to the DC bylaw, and sort of building all of this sort of dialogue that we're having now and through that MCR into that. You know, is going to come. So I don't think there's a need for an immediate sort of resolution or anything. I think that's going to be built into those conversations and those policies, but the time may come for that.
Okay, so we look forward to area-specific DCs and front-end credit agreements and all these things all being piled together at the end when you give us the financial report. They're still alive and well.
Yeah, I think all these tools all these items are on the table, and I would suggest to you that you know, even as we get the growth plan and the regional official plan update completed, you know, the financing and the infrastructure pieces would continue to evolve. So what we really need is a policy framework that puts all of these tools, as I said, in the toolbox, and then we would look at individual circumstances and make recommendations to council on. So you're not going to see a plan that says, you know, we'll use, when we've got the regional official plan, we'll use area-specific DCs here and something else here in September, because the reality is over the next 30 years, some of those decisions will get made as we update our DC bylaw or as particular areas come on stream. I think what's important is we have a policy framework that says they're all there for appropriate use. You know, you have to fit the tool to the circumstances of what has to be built, when and where, and who is built, who's the partner.
Okay, thank you. Tara, did you have anything else to add, or Craig, before we move receipt?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Craig, you're
All
good?
good. Pleasure to be with you this afternoon.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. Much more. I always like it when I have a complete change of mind when I read a report. Preconceived notion out the window. Okay, Councillor Starr, would you like to move receipt? All those in favor? Seeing no objections, we move to the next report, which is Land Needs Assessment Report Update. And we have Duran.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome.
So good afternoon, members of the Planning and Growth Management Committee. My name is Duran Wedderburn, and I'm here to deliver the presentation on the region's draft land needs assessment. The objective of the presentation is to provide an update on the LNA and supporting technical studies and discuss some matters around housing supply and demand. Next slide. As a quick refresher, our work addresses the policy context from 3 tiers of government: provincial plans and legislation, regional policies and strategic objectives, and local planning policies and implementation documents. These plans serve as the guiding framework to balance stakeholder interests. Next slide. The supporting policy context is further informed by the land needs assessment methodology. The methodology is a statutory document required by the province to implement the forecasts, minimum targets, and densities and policies of the growth plan. The primary outcome of the LNA is to determine if settlement area boundary expansion is required, and if so, the amount of land required to accommodate forecasted growth. One of the new considerations in the methodology is market-based analysis, which is not a new concept, but requires the examination of historic census data as an input to examine the trends and type of housing units that people typically prefer. For example, people within the 35 to 39 age cohort are typically looking to start their families and oftentimes have a preference for owning a home with a backyard, as an example. Next slide. So to augment the policy documents and guidance materials that set the planning framework, technical studies are also undertaken to examine current and future conditions to support our forecast work and policy development. On February 18th, we advised PGMC that we were updating several technical studies to respond to the new planning horizon and current conditions. These studies and analysis have been updated, and we will touch upon them later in the presentation. Next slide. Before we get into the land needs assessment, we've talked about how Peel has grown historically in previous meetings. So with the assistance of the Peel Data Center, we've pulled together a visual illustration based on impact data that highlights how Peel has developed since 1974. Noting the growth trajectory from south to north as Mississauga, followed by Brampton, builds out and then fills in. Next slide. So, since the February PGMC meeting, our allocation to the local municipalities is holding at its current values, but we continue to review and update based on the best information available. To achieve the provincial forecast to 2051, the region is planning to accommodate an additional 700,000 people and 270,000 units over the next 30 years. Historically, Peel has exceeded the population of the provincial population forecast, and we look to be on track to meet the provincial 2031 forecast of 1.64 million people by 2026, which is 5 years early. The 2031 forecast is the basis of the current in effect regional official plan. Next slide. The additional 271,000 units can be accommodated in a range and mix of housing structures. For the purposes of our forecast work, we generally utilize general categories to illustrate the housing mix. When implementing at the local level, there are a variety of built forms that can be utilized that are specific to local policies and regulations given the development context. Our aim is to plan for a range and mix of housing types to ensure people have sufficient choice to adjust their housing needs and lifestyles while reflecting provincial and regional policy objectives. Next slide. Further to the unit mix, in recent months, there's been ongoing discussion on accessory units and their ability to contribute to our growth to 2051. This includes the release of new data from the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, which shows a high proportion of second units in Brampton and Mississauga. We will be reviewing these factors and connecting with the local municipalities to determine if adjustments are required. Additional residential units serve a specific market segment and may have great benefit to the affordable rental housing market, and also accommodate gentle density by introducing new units into existing communities with amenities. Next slide. As we plan to accommodate new growth in Peel, we've taken a step back to capture how growth over the next 30 years could be accommodated. We've shown the market-based analysis on the left as discussed previously, and we've also now are showing a no settlement area boundary expansion option, which was presented in our report at the last PGMC meeting. This outcome will result in growth to 2051 being accommodated in the current 2031 boundary. The main difference is clearly the proportion of apartments required compared to singles and semis. 31% of all unit growth in apartments in the market-based analysis, and 66% of all unit growth in the apartment category if we were to go with the no settlement expansion option. A planned unit mix so far off the preferences of households, such as the results of a no settlement expansion approach, could result in significant housing affordability issues and promote leapfrogging beyond Peel's borders. On the other hand, the market-based approach would result in an intensification rate below the provincial minimum. Both cases have their limitations and do not address the policy framework outlined previously. Next slide. The LNA analysis utilized in our work presents a more balanced approach with about 50% of all units growth in apartment forms. The balanced approach also includes due consideration for the local context and municipal planning aspirations while responding to our legislative requirements. Next slide. Further to the analysis on the previous slide, and as mentioned in the previous presentation, through the settlement area boundary expansion work, PGMC staff was directed to examine the fiscal impact of planning for intensification versus greenfield development by evaluating a variety of scenarios with respect to greenfield density and intensification. Some of the scenarios are shown on the slide above. The work is being undertaken currently and will be presented in the fall to help inform with decision making. Next slide. Over the next 30 years, looking at the adjusted housing need, we are focused on providing a mix of units to support complete communities in key policy areas. We are currently planning to achieve a minimum intensification rate of 55%, which is above the provincial minimum of 50, and a density of 65 people and jobs per hectare for new DGA lands, which is above the provincial minimum of 50. The policy areas in Peel will be transformed. Densities will increase within delineated built-up areas through intensification, taking on a range and mix of structure types. Greenfield communities will grow denser with more compact urban forms as the proportion of single and semis to multi-unit homes increases. And minor growth will be directed to the existing rural areas. Next slide. We've spent a lot of time on the analysis so far looking forward at our projected need, but it's equally important to acknowledge our existing supply, which is based on available capacity and development application within our existing settlement areas and communities. We are planning to increase density within our existing greenfield communities to optimize our land supply. Higher densities are supported by transit planning across all 3 municipalities and will support more compact built forms and planning well above the minimum DGA density of 50 residents and jobs per hectare in all 3 of the local municipalities in Peel. Next slide. Increasing density across our existing greenfield communities will result in a proportional shift in the mix of units that exist to date. The greatest supply potential within our DGA areas is within the city of Brampton, who are currently undertaking a secondary planning exercise to increase densities in communities such as Heritage Heights. It should be noted that the majority of the existing designated greenfield areas are already within existing secondary or community plans and have active development applications underway. Next slide. While we address the supply in greenfield areas, we must also examine the potential to accommodate intensification. The intensification analysis addendum that we've prepared recognizes that the region has significant opportunities in strategic growth areas such as major transit station areas, urban growth centers, and major nodes and town centers to accommodate growth up to and beyond the 2051 planning horizon for the higher density market segment. In the short term, intensification may be impacted by COVID-19 mobility trends, but longer-term demographic and market trends and transit infrastructure investment will continue to support development. Next slide. Shifting to employment, our allocation remains unchanged to 2051. There's a need to plan for 330,000 additional jobs across Peel. Next slide. Over the next 30 years, we will continue to plan for balanced employment growth. As Peel continues to urbanize and more jobs are accommodated in mixed-use formats and compact forms, the majority of jobs growth will occur in our community areas. About 85% of the jobs will be in population-related or major office spaces. Employment areas will primarily consist of employment lands such as manufacturing, but there's also opportunities for major office, which support office uses in employment areas that are served by planned or existing transit. Next slide. To further augment our analysis and support the forecasts, we've undertaken an assessment of the existing employment land supply by looking to quantify the amount of lands that are captured within the region's draft employment area mapping. We've worked with the local municipalities to create an inventory of vacant or underutilized sites based on 2020 aerial mapping. In general, major opportunity areas are located within Peel, specifically in South Down and Mississauga along the Huron-Ontario corridor, and looking at Highway 50 and also along Mayfield Road. We estimate that about 1,500 hectares are vacant within the region and able to support continued intensification of employment development. Next slide. As an example, we've pointed out a couple of areas in Peel where we are planning to achieve increased densities by intensifying existing employment lands. We anticipate approximately 100,000 jobs could be accommodated within these areas. But we also must recognize that the mix of employment uses in the region will continue to intensify and diversify, being that the densest lands will most likely be in Mississauga, where it's supported by the Airport Corporate Center with office uses and future higher order transit. The example in Brampton along the Steeles corridor is more of a mix of an industrial corridor with some retail and commercial uses. And in Caledon, pointing to Bolton, where it is more low density employment uses, but there are opportunities for better site utilization. Next slide. One of the key pieces of work that the region's undertaken is an employment strategy discussion paper. I think we're all well aware of the challenges that we've had in terms of achieving the provincial employment forecasts. In 2017, an employment strategy discussion paper was undertaken to support planning for employment to 2051. The paper identified issues facing the region as it plans for employment growth and recommended actions to be undertaken to better position the region to support employment growth. Based on the additional 10 years of growth that we're planning for and the current pandemic, staff have retained Cushman & Wakefield to provide an addendum to the discussion paper. Overall, Cushman noted that many of the recommendations from 2017 are still applicable. And with respect to Peel's competitive advantage, will be continued to support strong performance in the industrial sector. And achieving the major office forecast was a challenge in 2041, and it will continue to be a difficult undertaking in the face of an evolving office market. One of the key takeaways from the analysis is the recognition of the changing nature of employment and the need for a monitoring program to inform decision-making. Next slide. One of the key outputs of the land needs assessment is the assessment of lands required or needed for conversion. Specifically, conversions from employment uses to non-employment uses must be considered as a part of the supply. Employment conversions are a new role for the region as part of our current MCR. Under the 2006 growth plan, this work was led by the local municipalities. The region is now working collaboratively with the local municipalities to inform the evaluation of these conversion requests. The preliminary analysis identifies 3 categories: supported, not supported, and sites where additional comprehensive planning by the local municipalities is required to consider the introduction of non-employment uses. If lands are not identified within the employment area of the region, a local official plan amendment would be required outside of the MCR to determine the appropriate land uses and regulations. Next slide. So just to provide a quick overview of the requests that we've received to date, we've received about 41 requests at the time of preparing this report, but we do anticipate that we will be receiving more in the coming months. In Brampton, as you can see, there is a concentration of requests around Bramley-Go, along the Steeles corridor, and also along Queen Street East, where there are a couple planned MCSAs. In Caledon, there are a few, just along the Highway 50, and at the proposed or planned Bolton Go, which is looking to specifically implement MZO. Next slide. In Mississauga, the majority of the lands are located along the Dundas corridor and in Lakeview, and these really just reflect the comprehensive planning that has already been undertaken by the local municipalities. Next slide. The preliminary staff analysis identified approximately 270 hectares for conversion across the region. The conversions supported to date are generally strategic in nature and implement comprehensive planning by the local municipalities. The sites supported by flexible criteria are intended to allow for additional comprehensive planning to be undertaken before future decisions can be made, as additional information is needed with respect to land use compatibility issues. Next slide. The preliminary analysis from the base LNA scenario provided in this update continued to identify about 440 hectares of southern area expansion lands that will be needed to accommodate growth over the next 30 years. As staff continue to refine our work based on the best information available, we'll be making and sharing the technical documents for comment and input from stakeholders. This includes providing a letter to stakeholders who have submitted an employment conversion request to notify them of the preliminary analysis. Feedback received over the summer will be incorporated as a part of the full LNA report in the fall of 2021. In addition, the LNA work is an integral element of the broader settlement area boundary expansion also underway. Thank you very much for your time, and at this point, we are prepared to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Duran. Mayor Thompson has his hand up.
Yes, Duran, and thank you very much. And I think you explained a lot of it for me, so thank you. But the Cushman report, the one thing that I do notice is for the future employment, and especially working from home, the one thing that we're starting to even find now is you can drive up any residential street and there's a UPS van or something parked right on the street doing deliveries. But now you got home-based businesses working out of there, and they're successful. They're going to have people as well. We're trying to reduce parking. We're trying to get people to take transit, and yet we're going to have a lot of people working from home. COVID has definitely changed that trend, and it's not going to go back. Have we thought of anything on how we follow the nature of that and home-based businesses and how that's built into the home? Like, I mean, that's just what's naturally going to happen. Unfortunately, Impact's going to have to rethink that someday because that's going to have a huge impact on us. Have we done any thought? Have we got any idea actually what that's going to look like, especially coming out of COVID, where a lot of people aren't going to return to work and are going to remain home? Yeah, like I got a neighbor here with the TD Bank. He's been on the 27th floor for the last 8 years. They paid him out, $25,000 to set up his own office here at home, right? This is where he's going to be, right, going forward, before he managed a whole floor. So, this is the change in demographics that we're starting to find. But again, if they're successful, they're going to need support networks and support people. And I know so much can be done online, but we like to work with other people. It's going to happen. So now we're going to start to get cars parking during the day because they're there for work, right? So have we considered how we're going to try to fix that even with new development coming in? We're trying to intensify. Now we've got people working there as well. So have we got any idea what that's going to look like? I guess is my question.
So through you, Madam Chair. So in the Cushman report, they do note that, the nature of work is going to shift and change. And a part of the consideration is going to be really how the work situation unfolds in terms of, are we going to go to more agile employment basis where, people are working from home, but they have the option to hot desk. And if they are working from home, is it 3 days a week versus 4 days a week? And I think that's going to be a reality that we have to track and monitor as things move forward. So one of the tools that we do have is the employment survey that is undertaken to, look at the questions that are asked and see, what we are yielding from that employment survey in terms of how people report. But you are correct in terms of MPAC and even census in terms of how people report where they work. I'm just thinking if you're working at 10 Peel Center Drive 3 days of the week, but you work from home, the remainder of the week, how do you report that and how does that get captured in the data? And that's where we're really pointing to, really ensuring that we're asking the right questions and we do have that robust growth monitoring so that we can start to inform some of the decision making at the regional policy level and then at the local implementation level as you start to think about what are the resources and supports that are now going to be required for more people working from home and how that impacts on existing infrastructure as well. So it is top of mind. We're starting to flush it out, but we're also welcoming any comments and inputs on it because it seems to be a moving target. But one thing we do know is that we don't have the answer right now, but we need to be well aware of the fact and start to think about how we're going to track and monitor it so that we can be responsive.
Well, it's the same thing as you say a hot desk. That's a really good analogy, and the Cushman report did hint on that. But where I'm going is, we were dealing with delivery vans all the time, blowing up traffic, dropping off to small businesses and everything. Now it's moved to the residential streets as well, and we haven't even factored that in yet on what that's going to look like. So it means work going forward, but I got to say the Cushman report I was just trying to build on what they had here is I think all of us as council are really going to have to really think on what this looks like. And I think you heard the young people speak today, through, their activist point of view, but there's a lot of things here that we're all going to have to look through different lenses that we never have done before. And of anything of COVID, it really has created that as we go forward. I'm going to say it's going to be exciting the next 10 years and what that new workforce is going to look like. So thank you.
Mr. Mayor, we're all going to have to make our questions shorter and our rebuttals a little shorter because we've got very little time left and I have a planning meeting for Mississauga at 6:15.
I'm just having too much fun.
You are. I love listening to you. Question of Duran. I don't know if I read it in this report or I saw it somewhere else, but changing our PPJ per hectare from 65 up to 75 apparently saves 500 hectares of land. Are we looking at all at changing the density just in our modeling so that we can see the difference it would make?
So to you, Madam Chair, so I think you're referring to the slide that noted the fiscal analysis work that's being undertaken to look at the financial impacts associated with greenfield versus intensification development. So through that work, we're looking at the financial impacts of shifts in terms of the densities, whether they be higher or lower, the costs around greenfield versus intensification. But are you looking for something more robust in terms of 75 ppj beyond kind of what we've indicated in terms of the additional land that would be required?
I would like to see it modeled. It's going to take 1,000,000 years and it's never going to happen, but I'd like to see it modeled. I know our staff would like to see it modeled in Mississauga. They support the balanced approach 55% intensification, but they quietly hint, say we could go a little higher down in the south end if we had to. I love those young people who are very idealistic who said, pile it all into Brampton and Mississauga. If anybody drives up here, Ontario, and takes a look at the towers going up in my ward, I don't know where else we're going to put them. But I do agree with preserving as much farmland as possible. And I was just wondering if it's not terribly onerous to just change it to 75 ppj and see what that'll look like. It just if it's a lot of work, I can probably ask our guys to do it. But I also was asked by our staff to remind everybody about the conversion of lands to residential in certain packages along our transit systems, so that that is taken care of and helps us with housing as well. Also helps us with affordable housing. So, but if you could look at that, I would appreciate it. The 75 and just see what it would do, because despite the fact everybody's sort of rubbing their hands together and saying they're going to pave over Caledon, I don't want that to happen either. So if that's not okay. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, Paul, can you move receipt of this report? And thank you very much, Duran. It was a very good report. Paul, you moved it? Good man. It takes us to 5.3. settlement area boundary expansion scoped sub-watershed study.
And through you, Madam Chair, so this is a for information report that provides an update on the sub-watershed study material, and staff can go through it if you'd like, but it is just for information. The material is there, and
Nope, it was fine. I went through it, and so we will move to receive it.
I'll move it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Sinclair has a question.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Just for clarification, I'll turn off my video.
Okay.
For clarification, there's a focus study area in red on a map, but it leaves out substantial areas of subwatersheds. And I wondered if the Upper Etobicoke and West Humber subwatersheds first phase characterization and major flows would be included in the first phase of a subwatershed study, and then the focused areas for more details. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair. So Marquette can probably provide more detail, but the way that the subwatershed study worked was that the first analysis was a broad characterization of the watersheds, which was then used to provide input to the focus study area, which was the more detailed study area where we undertook the more detailed, transportation and employment and other work, and then also did the more detailed environmental work. So that's the way the study unfolded. The broad characterization, identifying the focus study area, and then that focus study area was where more detailed environmental and all the other settlement boundary expansion study work was undertaken.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Moved by Mayor Thompson. Anybody objecting? Thank you. And we're going into 5.5, which requires some motions.
Sorry,
5.4?
5.4, Madam Chair.
Yep, okay.
Yeah, aggregate.
I think my brain has gone completely numb. It's late in the day for me. Yes, it's aggregate report. Any comments, or do we need a presentation? Okay.
There is no presentation.
Nope. Okay.
Nope.
Councillor Sinclair's got his hand up, I think.
Who?
Councillor Sinclair?
Yes. Me. Yes, sorry.
But I'd like a few points for the record, if I may.
Okay.
I'd like to make 4 quick points. I think we need to clarify the role of MNRF in the Aggregate Resources Act in terms of land use management in the pits over the years. That would be my first point. There is a draft land use compatibility guideline out by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, which is going to replace former D-6. This is a major issue for Caledon, and we need to focus on that and have some conversations on it. Your map for bedrock looks like it hasn't been edited for significant woodlands, settlements, or wetlands, for example. So we need to review that carefully together. And then there's an issue of all of the provincial plans and the notion of most restrictive policy in effect. And I think we need to discuss that because it matters which policy is being considered in an aggregate operation approval. Those are my points. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Innes, you'll move your seat. Thank you. Now we will get to 5.5, which requires, I guess these will eventually go to council, but we have to endorse a couple of recommendations. Is there any questions, any discussion? Anybody want to do any comments from staff?
I think it's very explanatory. I would move the reports if you want, Madam Chair, but some discussion. I'm good with it, but I guess maybe already that time and
camera off,
discussion.
Alan, you have to turn your camera off when you bubbled through that whole thing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. We're all tired.
Yeah, no, actually, I think the reports are very self-explanatory. I'll gladly move them at that point. You're right that there's some recommendations to go forward on this. I got to say, I think Caledon guys have a pretty good idea, but I'm not taking everybody else for granted. If people have got questions, please ask,
I brought a couple questions forward from our staff. We're talking about inclusionary zoning, and there were some comments and articles in the paper that talked about a requirement for municipalities to put some money up into inclusionary zoning to try and make that work. I'm wondering if there's any discussion about putting a 1% surcharge or something into the regional budget for inclusionary zoning.
Through you, Madam Chair, I can tell you at this point that we've not included anything in the draft budget. However, we will be coming to council on either June 24th or July 8th. I apologize, I forget which meeting, to give you a bit of an update on the 2022 budget forecast. So if that's something that you want to have a discussion on at that particular point in time, we can certainly do that. I don't know what our staff position is with respect to the need for financial incentives. Maybe Adrian can speak to that. Because it's not something that's come across my desk at this stage.
I've just been reading about it a lot, and I think Toronto's looking at doing it. So it's bound to come up in some discussion. I just thought we might have a position on it, or if it's absolutely not, I understand that as well. It's a tough year.
Maybe Adrian can just comment. Yeah.
Yeah, just going to mention, and you may recall from the last committee meeting that we had some analysis on the sort of the market assessment of inclusionary zoning and some of the implications, and that analysis we're sort of factoring pretty carefully into our approach going forward, and it did show that there are certainly areas of Peel where the market can absorb inclusionary zoning, and that the public investment that's happening in things like our LRT and other rapid transit and other public investments in infrastructure, and the uplift being provided through the comprehensive planning that's being done through things like the MTSA work and the community plans, and that does provide an opportunity for inclusionary zoning to be implemented without requiring financial incentives. But it also found that there are other areas of the region where that market isn't there, and there would be an impact. So we're looking to make sure that when we implement things, we take that into account. But we do think there are opportunities to implement inclusionary zoning without the need for financial incentives, and our analysis is showing that. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Alan has moved this. I don't see any objections. And that takes us to the massive repeated letters, which I'd like someone to move receipt of. Paul, would you move receipt? Thank you. And our next meeting, I'm sorry, I should have it memorized. When is our next?
September 2nd.
Okay. And between now and then, Stephanie and Catherine and a few of us are going to get our heads together and look at a way that we can still have the public involved, but not take 2/3 of the meeting. And it's a little repetitious. We've got more important things. Well, not more important, but we have some agendas that we have to cover. So we'll have a look at that for September and get back to you all before we have the meeting and get some input.
Okay, thank you.
Who would like to move adjournment? Paul is moving it again. Good man, Charlie Brown. Okay, all those in favor? Councillor Innes is going to go, no, I want to keep going, right? She just left.
Said no one ever. My daughters are like, "Are you done yet?"
I have another one at 6:15. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Chair. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good night.